Does it say recording?
Yes.
All right. So you have experienced this morning the basic concept of this class. Yeah? It's in a very intense listening and asking Q&A sessions. Yeah? And I know this is taking a toll on you guys. As in, okay, I need to listen and then watch. And then the idea of this class is also the combination of the speakers. Yeah? So I don't have just one, and you get through that. And sometimes it's a trauma to sit through. It's like, ooh, don't flood the classroom, please. And it's a challenge. I know this from personal experiences because I teach back-to-back 4-hour classes. So you gotta stay focused and breathe. It's all about breathing the right way. Yeah? So my breathing is a little bit accelerated because I have 1 out of 3 guest speakers right now present, but that's no problem. We will figure this out. This class is also, this year's class, the speakers and panelists invited, is also a reflection of what we have done in the past with our program. Yeah? So Jessica this morning is a very early alumni. She is engaged with the program as part of the advisory board. She is a member of the Stiles family, aka Stiles Corporation. Terry Stiles was her mentor, and Kenneth Stiles, now running this company, is a similar mentorship, similar amazing person like his dad. We learned this morning when we talked about Terry Stiles, Dan and Debbie, absolutely fantastic comments about him. I sum it up with one word: humble. When you think about legacy and reputation in the community and what you leave as the developer, remember, you're putting concrete and reinforced steel on a property side. This thing is not being blown away, hopefully, by the next big wind. Yeah? You're putting this in at least for 30 years based on your pro forma, but what's the half-life time of a concrete building? If you don't demolish it, it will stand there for more than 30 years. So you're leaving a legacy. When you have design components with me in classes, I will tell you as a sins of builders and architects, as in concrete, but nowadays we're actually putting fake facade up on parking structures so that they look like it's an office building. Yeah? Or at least some green on it. Simple things. A bucket of paint can redevelop a whole neighborhood, we used to say 10, 15 years ago. If you haven't done it so, in other classes, I always say Cincinnati, over the Rhine. There have been a few buckets and a few millions of dollars investment and really grew honest, smart government with redevelopment agencies, and it's one of the most vibrant neighborhoods in the nation now. In 2001, it was center of street riots, the highest crime rates, not just in Chicago, but also in that specific neighborhood. Yeah, so we are creating new spaces. Now we're transforming those, hopefully into places. That's another class. So, talking about transformation. Part of the transformation for this afternoon is to show you the different facets of real estate development in those different stages of real estate development. Stages of development, construction class. I'm going to torture you with a few lectures online for that. Yeah? It's not here right now the idea inception, having the idea, testing the idea, going through the pro forma, and then you end up with the go, no-go decision to actually run this. Our next guest speaker here is an alumni. 2016, 2016. Right here, that's summer class with you. Yeah. And who actually, his main job, and he will give you more details about it, when you have done all your due diligence work and you're really happy with this project and the financing is done, the equity is set up, the distribution is already more, you're talking to this guy at least, because he's part of stage 5 and stage 6. Stage 6, construction. Yeah? So that all said, with no further ado, because he didn't produce his bio on time. You have to introduce yourself. I only can introduce him as a friend, as an alumni of the program, as a member of the Mosque construction family, Kyle Thompson. And we are scheduled to have 2 more guest speakers coming in, as I pointed out earlier this morning. I will find them. We'll see. Aim for 1 p.m. So we'll see about that. Until then, I hope you ask critical questions to him. He has a different career than the guys before him today. But also the idea of this class is to give you all the different angles of careers and where you're at. Yeah? We have political science, we have construction management, all the above, the interior design in this classroom as a capacity. So I expect different levels of questions as well. I promise one thing, it's going to be fun, and the second thing, he's not going to pull out a calculator and run some financial analysis. Everything else, it's his thing. Kyle, it's all yours. Oh yeah, an afternoon session. Please sign in. Gotta do this.
Hey guys, how you doing? Like I said, my name is Kyle Thompson. I'm 27 years old, graduated from the program in 2016. Trust me, I know how these afternoon sessions can go. I'm going to try to do this PowerPoint pretty quickly and answer any questions you guys have. Like you mentioned, I work for Mosque.
So, it's not a race.
Through this thing. Like you mentioned, I work for Mosque. I'm a project engineer. That title is very misleading. I am not an engineer by any means, so please keep that in mind when you're asking me questions, because I may or may not know the answer. So we'll just jump into the first slide. So this guy right here in the middle, this is Bob Moss. If you guys have ever had the pleasure of meeting him, he's probably one of the nicest guys I've literally ever met in my entire life. Great public speaker, so please, again, do not compare me to him, because he is phenomenal. Guy on the right here is his son, Scott Moss. He's the president of Moss. And then on this side is Chad Moss. He's a vice president for Moss. He handles a lot of the charity work that Moss does on a regular basis. So this is a little bit of my background here. I was born in Merritt Island, Florida. For those of you guys that don't know where that is, where they shoot up the space shuttles, right by Kennedy Space Center there. That picture is actually my buddy surfing, and obviously that's a space shuttle going off. So, my undergraduate degree, I went to a small NEI school in South Carolina, right outside of Hilton Head, South Carolina, called South Carolina Buford. Played baseball there. Got my undergraduate degree in psychology. So hopefully the wheels are starting to turn. That I have a psychology degree and I work in construction. So I'll get there. After I graduated from USCB, I came down to Nova Southeastern. My brother actually played baseball here as well. He was part of the 2016 National Championship team. So I came down here originally just I didn't have any plans out of undergrad. Figured I'd come down here and try to find a job or a grad school opportunity. Originally came down here to get my doctorate in psychiatry. As I started looking at it more, realized that 6 years of more school did not sound like a lot of fun. So started looking around, happened to stumble across the MSRED program here at Nova, enrolled, and from day one I can tell you I did not know anything as far as real estate, construction, very little about finance, accounting, really any of that stuff. I heard you guys talking about Argus. Argus was one of the toughest classes I had here by far. It's very difficult, very challenging, but once you get it, it starts clicking and it just starts rolling. So as you can see this picture, that's my brother with the national championship thing there. Jumping back to Moss, this is our headquarters here, based out of Fort Lauderdale, actually in Wilton Manors, just north of here on Andrews Avenue. This is just some little fun facts about the company, as you can see. So probably the thing I want to touch on most is this part at the bottom here, 90% repeat client business. So anytime that we go, as you guys, I'm sure, trying to be developers, I know not all of you are in this class for that, but Moss prides ourselves on not just doing one job with the developer, we're trying to do multiple jobs, because we know that if we can get multiple jobs as a developer, that first job was successful for that developer and don't want to use this again. Again, just a survey, kind of bragging about ourselves a little bit. I had to put that in there. I was kind of forced by the marketing department. So, this is all the locations that we've done work in. So we have offices on all the green marks here. The kind of reddish is where we've done work before. majority of the RED work, especially on the West Coast, is solar work that we've done. We've done a lot of solar work in Hawaii, we did Washington, Oregon, Wyoming, Montana. Like I said, our main offices are here in Fort Lauderdale. We have an office in Miami, and then we just started an office in Dallas, Texas. So these are all the different sectors of development that we're in. Mainly we do, we tell people a lot of times, we do bathrooms and kitchens. So that means hotels, apartments, condos. Just recently, we were awarded 20 FP&L solar field projects all throughout the state of Florida. You guys may have saw it in the Super Bowl, I don't know if you did or not, but FP&L is doing a big push to do a whole bunch of renewable energy by 2033. They do it by, you'll see here, all of these projects we go by, the monetary amount. Solar goes by watts, megawatts, gigawatts. Just to show you how much I did not know when I started, I just found out 2 weeks ago what a watt is. So that kind of tells you I've been working for Mosque for 2 years, just found that out, so that's kind of where I'm at. And actually starting April 15th, I will be moving to our solar division. I'm not exactly sure what project I'm going to, but I'm going to be working on a solar field job. So that's kind of why I started getting the training in this, and I'll tell you right now, I don't know anything about electrical. Don't know certainly anything about solar, renewable energy, but Mosque does a great job of training you. They give you an opportunity to come in. They basically throw you out to the wolves in a sense. I don't mean that in a bad way, but they give you an opportunity to learn and grow at a very quick pace. So these are just some of the big projects that we've done. This is actually Icon Las Olas that you guys may all have seen. I don't know Las Olas Boulevard there. So actually we did the All Aboard Florida station down in West Palm and I believe, just West Palm area. We did the Oceanographic Center for Nova out on the beach there. We've done some schools, as I mentioned, we did solar, hospitality. We've also done some prisons, mostly out in the Tampa, Naples area. But we try to, we're open really to pretty much anything. The solar thing, how that got brought up was a higher up executive at Mosque knew a friend of a friend who was doing solar work out in Hawaii. The guy said, hey, the project's not going well, any chance you guys could come out, take a look at it, maybe be a consultant for us, advise us how to get back on track. We ended up taking over the job, and the guy that took over the job had 0 solar experience, just only construction management experience. And since then now, like I mentioned, we just got awarded 20 FP&L solar field jobs in Florida. So probably the best thing about Mosque by far, and I know this is going to sound very cliche, and it kind of is in a sense, but the culture there is pretty unbelievable. Everyone you talk to is super nice, very helpful. Everyone seems to know everybody. You can talk to Bob Moss, Scott Moss, Chad Moss on a regular basis. They're very friendly. You can always go into their office and talk to them, so it's a very great environment. So like I said, if you ever have the chance to go see Bob or Chad or Scott speak, I would highly recommend doing it because they'll get you ready to run through a brick wall after they get done. So these are just 3 of our core values, as I touched on: the contagious energy, entrepreneurial spirit, and honor relationships. So a big one there for me is honor relationships. In construction is a very stressful environment. It's very easy to get very frustrated at people, kind of burn bridges. And we pride ourselves on, we push jobs, we do these very short schedules, these very massive buildings, and there are times where we do butt heads, but at the end of it, I would say, like we talked about, the 90%, additional projects after the first one, that's because of that. Because we are honoring relationships at the same time. And the biggest thing is we honor relationships with our subcontractors, which is the best thing by far to me. So I'm not going to touch on this too much. If you guys want to get with me afterwards, we can kind of go through this a little bit more. But this is just kind of how Mosque goes about raising you through the company at a quicker pace than maybe another company would do. They promote, as long as you're willing to work hard and willing to learn, you're going to do just fine with us. You'll do just fine really at any job, really. But Mosque really gives you an opportunity to learn at the pace that you want to. You know, if you want to learn a little bit slower, then that's on you. But if you want to run through it and get going and, you know, one day run your own job in 2-3 years, then that's something that they're willing to let you do.
How's that path working out for you right now? I'm completely brutally interject with questions here.
Yeah, no problem. So my first project, and I'll get to it in the next few slides, it was called Reba Condominium. It's on basically the corner of Sunrise and US 1, just north of Fort Lauderdale here. It's a big white building next to an Audi dealership. When I started, like I said, I want to be very clear, I did not know anything about construction at all. I did not know the difference between a flathead and a Phillips head screwdriver when I started. I got hired. I was very nervous. I was like, holy crap, what's going to happen here? I'm probably going to get fired within the first couple weeks. But they basically let me, so I told them beforehand, as the MSRED programs you guys may already know, you handle a lot of the financials and how to handle money and that kind of stuff. So I told them beforehand, that's where I'm familiar with. What I'm not familiar with is the nuts and bolts of construction. That's what I need help with. So they let me go out into the field and work. My title was not a superintendent, but I was a superintendent, which just means that I'm out on the project on a day-to-day basis, actually seeing the work get put into place. And you learn much quicker when you're standing there watching the guys actually build the buildings. And that helped me out a lot. Now I'm on my new project called Adagio Fort Lauderdale Beach. And I'm actually in the office more handling the finances and buying out contracts with people, negotiating with people there. And it's much easier to do my job now, knowing the construction side of things, than it would have been if they would have thrown me in there right from the very beginning. This slide right here is just some of the charity work that we do that Chad handles. We do some work with Nova. Apparently not enough to get it put on the slide.
Well, Bob Moss is what? He's just a Hall of Famer of this university, so you don't put this up on that slide.
So, like I mentioned, this is Reba here. Units start at, the cheapest one was $700,000. They go up to, I think, $4.2 million for the penthouse units. So they're very nice units. It's a very nice building. 16 stories, 100 units. They have sold to date, I believe, 75. So that kind of shows you where the market is now. The bubble is starting to kind of burst in the Fort Lauderdale, Miami area. It is trending more north right now to West Palm, Boca, Port St. Lucie, even to the kind of Orlando areas. I'll just play this video that the real estate company put together as a sales video.
You might have to get out and copy and paste it over. Oh, no, it's popping up. Give me a moment. Video was working yesterday. YouTube was working yesterday.
So as you can see, it turned out to be a really nice building. Total project cost when we started was, I believe, $85 million. After it was all said and done, I believe the total cost of the project came around right under $90 million. Big things to touch on here is Reba was a fully customizable condo building. Meaning that if you were interested in a unit, you could come in and do whatever you wanted to that unit. I think I heard you mention you're an architect. You can imagine how that can kind of strain on the relationship between the architect and the construction management team, because as we're going up building this building, homeowners are coming in saying, oh, well, I want to knock down this wall. I want to put a toilet over here. And we design everything, and from the very beginning, we use a program called BIM. BIM is a 3D model that for all MEPFs in the building, and it's incredible what it can do. Go ahead.
Do you guys use Revit?
We do. I don't personally use Revit, but our BIM department does use Revit, and we are very familiar with it. Kind of Revit and CAD are obviously the two big ones that we run into. But so yeah, like I said, this building was fully customizable, and as we're going up the building, people are changing things left and right. The other big thing in here was that the developer of this building, about probably 3 or 4 months before we were supposed to TCO, for those of you that don't know what TCO is, it's temporary certificate of occupancy. It means that the building might not be fully complete, but residents can start moving in the building, and for a developer, that means that they can start closing on units and getting the money that, in their agreement. So 3 or 4 months before we were supposed to TCO, the bank that was an equity partner with the developer pulled the development rights from the developer. The most politically correct way for me to describe this developer is that he did not know what he was doing. He, frankly, was a total idiot, to put it just total blunt. He was telling homeowners, the Mosque project schedule had us finishing September 2017. He was telling homeowners that they would be able to move in Christmas of 2016.
That's a problem.
So that tells you right there kind of all you need to know about that guy. I actually did punch out and stayed at Reba after homeowners moved in. Was finding out some crazy stories. Homeowners were telling me, the developer told them to sell their house. They were losing their capital gains tax, their homestead exemption tax. So as you can imagine, when these homeowners moved in, they were very upset. And the biggest thing is that although that had nothing to do with Mosque's name was on this building. So everyone that moved in said, oh, we saw Mosque was building this, we were very excited, but when we moved in, we were very disappointed. So that's obviously kind of that hurts to hear, when you spend 2 years on this job and you hear that. So the other big thing with this building is that it was designer ready, meaning that we did not do bedroom or living room flooring. We didn't do shower enclosures, we didn't do those kinds of things. Basically it was, the homeowner could move in and it was a white canvas for them to do whatever they wanted to do. Well, when you don't have flooring in a unit, but you have the countertops, cabinets, the doors, all that's finished, tile is a very messy installation, and all of that stuff got damaged after they tiled the building. So homeowners were moving in because maybe they paid the developer to install tile for them. They moved in and they see there's a hole in their wall from a guy, taking a tile and throwing it through the drywall. So obviously, like as you're hearing, it was a very difficult project. But all in all, I'm very proud of how it turned out. As of right now, so we got CO in July of 2018, TCO'd in January of 2018, and so we're right now in the warranty period of this building. My new project that I'm currently on is called Adagio Fort Lauderdale Beach. This is a 11-story condo building. It started off at 31 units. A homeowner actually combined 2 units, so now it's at 30 units. We are scheduled to TCO in June of 2019, and we are currently finished the 3rd, 4th, and 5th floors, so we just have 4 or 5 more floors left to finish. These are the aerial photos of the job, and then these pictures are actually of our mock-up unit. As you can see, the views are pretty incredible. This is on the So you go over the bridge on Sunrise, and this is on the Fort Lauderdale beach side of the Intercoastal. So big things to touch on here. The developer at Reba did not spend the money on interiors. He spent the money on the common areas, the lobby, that kind of stuff. This developer is a Venezuelan family, and they have spent a lot of money on the finishes. So as you can see, these cabinets are from a company called Scavellini USA. Probably some of the best cabinets I've ever seen in my entire life. The doors are all Italian. As you can see, that tub is like a $3,000 tub or something like that. It's absolutely insane. And then the views themselves, these units start at $2 million a piece. As of right now, they have sold 14, I believe, including the ones where a homeowner can buy 2 of them.
Bottom right picture.
Yep.
The view you're looking at, that's west.
Yeah, west side, looking downtown.
Facing east or facing west?
Facing west, looking downtown.
Oh, facing west, okay.
Yeah. And then like the view in the top left is looking southwest towards Los Olas Boulevard.
All right.
So big things with this one, this condo is also a fully customizable condo building. Big problems we run into is traditionally construction management companies do not deal with homeowners until after they move in. And even after they move in, typically the developer or the owner of the building is the one who's kind of the middleman between the homeowners and the construction management company. So far, 2 of the units, we are dealing with the interior decorators on a regular basis, which means that on top of being the GC for 28 units, we are essentially the individual GC for 2 units. And one of those units, they paid $4.6 million for. So they have very high expectations coming in. They're doing hardwood floors, which I would not recommend in South Florida, but if you pay $4.6 million, it's totally up to you, I guess. The customization alone for that unit has been $250,000 on cabinetry, doors, countertops. The other unit has been close to $500,000 worth of customization. So as you can imagine, as we're trying to finish this building, and most of my time gets spent dealing with just these 1 or 2 units on a regular basis. So it's a little bit frustrating at times, but at the same time, these units are going to look incredible when they're done. So that's definitely one of the best things about the whole experience. I think that may be my last slide. So the only other thing I wanted to touch on, before I turn it over to you guys for questions is, like I said, going into this, I had no experience at all. I started off in the real estate development processes class. You can ask Fred Forby, day 1, I told him, hey, I think I might be in a little over my head here. Not sure if I should be doing this or not. He kind of calmed me down, and gradually over time, you start picking up things and things start repeating themselves, and this program gets a lot easier. For me, it was very interesting. It was probably one of the best decisions I made in my life to do. I know there's people in the program that have done it for different reasons, but everyone I've talked to seems to have a great time with it. So I hope you guys are enjoying it, and if you guys have any questions, just let me know.
Question, when you say both of these buildings were the units are fully customized, now, as the general contractor, are you supplying material or are they supplying material?
Yeah, so, and actually, I should have probably touched on this beforehand, but so the biggest thing that we have to do as a construction management company at the very beginning is during the pre-construction phase, we're going out and getting estimates from subcontractors, trying to get to, we only do guaranteed maximum price contracts, so GMP. So we sign a contract before we start saying, we will not exceed, X amount of dollars to build this project unless there are changes by the owner that he approves. So when we're doing that process, we put the contract together and we specify everything. Okay, we got pricing to do traditional American, hollow wood doors. So that way, when we go into the construction process, the owner's not like, well, I thought we were doing Italian doors, or I thought we were doing this or that. So it's very spelled out what Moss is responsible for, or any GC would be responsible for, and it'll vary from project to project. Like Adagio here, we weren't doing, at the beginning, we were not doing tile in the living areas. But the owner said, you know what, I want you guys to take that on. So when we got the pricing at the beginning for him to do it, his loan from the bank only went to a certain amount of money. And he said, okay, right now, I can't include that in the contract for you guys to do, but the minute that we sign the GMP and start work, you're gonna get that change order to do that work. So that's kind of, but we are supplying the material, yes.
Okay, so if I, as an owner, I say I want black walnut, right? Is the company making money on the spread between their cost to buy the material and?
Yes.
Okay, so there is
Yes.
a markup, okay.
Yes, there's actually a very large markup, especially on the construction. The minute that you see the markup, you're kind of like, oh my God, you know. That was the biggest thing too about Reba was like I said, the finishes, the developer did not spend the money on the finishes, but he was upcharging to do the work for these homeowners. So when they moved in, they were like, I paid $50,000 for my kitchen. This does not look like a $50,000 kitchen. And I was like, I'm sorry, I had no idea that you were getting charged that amount. So that, from my standpoint, that's kind of, it's up to the developer, but that's where a developer makes a lot of money. That's where you get that pro forma and you get that, you know, return on your investment back.
But I mean, you're hired by the developer to put the project, to build the project. So I'm saying, the developer is getting the merchandise, or is Mosque getting the?
We are getting directed by the developer, and then we are going and getting the material and actually building everything. Okay,
and when, on the new stuff, the customized stuff, I'm trying to figure the customized stuff down in my head. Are you does Mosque upcharge the developer?
So I think the best way to put this is any change order that we execute with the developer, we have a markup typically between 2 to 4%. Right now on Adagio, we're 3.5% fee.
And then the developer then takes that and marks it up and gives it to the end
Correct.
user. Okay.
And then subcontractors have 15% overhead profit that they make on any change order or any work from the very beginning. That's their profit. So their risk is a little less than the job, but their contracts are obviously smaller than when all of the trades are together. That's why we only make a small portion where the subcontractors make 15% on that.
Thank you.
I have a question, it's kind of personal, but I did as well, I did my undergrad in psychology, so I have background in real estate, and I know a lot of you guys do, so good. But did you find any like tactics that worked for you, or things that you did, and how long did it take you to actually get into the field?
So when I started the program, probably the first class was a little overwhelming at first, just learning the X's and O's of this real estate stuff and everything like that. As you start, there's going to be people in here that have experience in this, and you'll hear questions from them and conversations like that. And the best part for me was the guest lectures. People that came in that had been working it and just asking them questions, because unfortunately at the end of the day with construction and development, I wish there was a book you could read that spelled everything out for you, but unfortunately there's not. There's 1,000 different ways that you can do things, and just because you decide to do one thing does not mean that a person can't go the complete opposite direction and be successful. But really for me, it was just trying to make it as interesting for myself as possible and relate it to the real world as much as possible. Because I don't have, how many of you guys have taken the real estate investment class before you? Okay. So that class right there, whether you want to develop on your own, whether you don't want to do anything with real estate at all, and you start working in another field, and 10 years from now you decide, hey, I want to buy a real estate property, that class can be used for anything. So I wouldn't necessarily, obviously the construction class, that's construction. But everything you guys learn, I wouldn't necessarily look at it as just being real estate. It can be turned into really anything. So, but yeah, I hope that kind of eased the.
Did you intern anywhere, or did you?
So when I was halfway through the program, I started working for a company called the Urban Group, and I worked as a right-of-way agent in the property management division for the FDOT. So that really helped me out a lot because, and I probably shouldn't say this, but whatever. Government work there's not a lot going on. So when I was in grad school, I would bring my work with me, to the FDOT. I had a lot of time to study there, and that really helped out a lot. I know for a lot of you guys, you work very grueling jobs, probably working more than 40 hours a week, I guess, for a lot of you guys. So really kudos to you guys for being able to do that. I'll tell you right now, if I was in the same position as you guys working from Austin trying to do this on Saturdays, it would be extremely hard. But the way to look at it is you got to take what you learn in here and use it on your regular job and try to really think about it all the time. And if it's interesting for you, then it becomes easier to do.
Thank you.
So I heard you say that you were superintendent for a while before you got to your current position. What is your current position?
So I'm a project engineer right now.
Okay.
Like I said, not an engineer. It's just an entry-level position at Mosque. Basically, our entry-level positions are project engineers, more of the office side of things.
Okay.
Field engineer is the superintendent side. And then we have the estimators, they call it cost engineers.
So what is, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
You say it's the office side, but what happens in the office?
So the office side is more, you're buying out contracts, subcontractors, you're meeting with them. Typically when we start a project, let's say I needed somebody to install these for me. Typically we get 2 to 3 bids, and then we go and meet with them and we're saying, okay, what did you include in your price? Trying to get them apples to apples, make sure it's fair. And then we buy them out. We're working on making sure everyone gets paid. We're making sure that we're looking ahead at the drawings too, trying to catch problems that maybe the field guys haven't gotten to yet. And really, when I say office and field side, we're all intertwined. We can't do the job without each other. And it's more just, like I said, we're buying them out, we're making sure, we're checking the finances, making sure we stay on budget, while the field guys are getting the work done and making sure that we meet that schedule that we agreed to. You're good. Any other questions?
I have another question. So you said, as a construction management developer, you make more money, or that's where you can really, I guess, juice your returns. When you say that, how do you go about juicing returns?
So it's really all about weighing risk. So with Reba, we knew going into it that we were dealing with a tough developer, inexperienced developer, and we knew that the custom condos were going to be a potential issue. So we actually raised our fee on that job to about 4 or 4.5% to help us with, if a problem came up and we had to eat the cost, then we were covered because our fee was a little bit higher. Now, on other jobs like a solar field, for example, we don't make that much. We don't make 4% on it. We make more like 2% because the risk isn't nearly as much. So it's all about kind of weighing that out for yourself.
So how did you get introduced to Mosque exactly?
So
somebody that worked there, or?
Yeah, so I had heard about Mosque before. When I started, I was like, I don't really know if I want to do construction management. That seems like a whole lot. And like I said, I didn't know anything about construction. I had a friend that worked for Mosque, and I just kind of was talking to him, and I said, I wanted to be a developer. I just finished the master's program here. But I was like, I don't know anything about construction, so I feel like if I go into it, I'm just going to be way in over my head, a lot of risk there. So I talked to him, and at the time, Mosque was expanding very rapidly. And they just happened, I went for an interview, and they took a chance on me, and really that's kind of how I got my foot in the door. I was at the career fair on Thursday, I met you and everything. And I would say it's all about just, if I know of an opening, I'm all about, if you guys want to call me and have a chance to interview for it, I'm all about it. But obviously, there comes to a point where we can only expand so much. And unfortunately, with construction, the biggest thing too is we might expand really quick for 5 years, and then it may stop. And so unfortunately, we have to kind of, make sure we're looking way ahead so that we don't overstaff, and then we have to obviously let a lot of people go. Yeah, it's kind of all about just, you're going to get a lot of opportunities through this program. You're going to meet a lot of people. The Styles company is great. I mean, obviously Terry Styles was on the board here. I think his wife or son or daughter is the head of the board now. I'm not really looking at it. And that's a great company too. From everything I've heard from them, they're awesome. And obviously you see their signs everywhere in downtown Fort Lauderdale. So yeah, it's just all about, trying to, stay on Professor Ford, everything like that, just ask them, hey, has anything popped up or anything like that? You'll get an opportunity, I can show you that.
Is Mosque potentially opening up more locations in other states?
So right now, we opened up the Dallas office probably a year ago, and they're trying to get that going and get it taken off. And then if that is able to take off, then yeah, they absolutely want to expand. We were told that, I guess, to open up a new office, it costs about $5 million right off the bat, and so it takes probably 4 or 5 years to really get going. And we're a new player out in Dallas too, so when people hear, oh, you don't really have a lot of experience out here in Texas, because the building codes are different. There's a whole bunch you got to deal with a different municipality that we're not familiar with, so it is a little tough. But Florida, we're doing pretty good, so it's tough to say that we need to get out of Florida.
As far as customizations of the units, that's not pre-construction, or they're able to do that post-construction as well? Post-construction,
yeah. So we actually, and by post-construction, I almost mean mid-construction, because we could have had a whole unit, drywall's up, paint's on there, and homeowner says, I want to add a whole bunch of lighting in here. And we're like, okay, we'll go in there and knock everything down and put it in for you. But obviously the costs go up because we have to demo all that work and go back in there and do it.
As far as customization goes, they have specific spots that for like a bathroom or plumbing, obviously.
Yeah, so there's only, really with condos, there's really one main code that governs condo units, and that's FHA. You have to have at least one FHA bathroom, just in case, you ever sold the unit or a person that is in a wheelchair can have access to the bathroom. So, like some of the units at Reba, the developer took so long to make decisions on that we actually didn't do anything in the unit. We put drywall up and then finished one of the bathrooms. And then we were able to include that in TCO. So technically somebody could occupy that unit. I wouldn't advise on that, but yeah, technically you can. There are ways to get TCO without actually finishing the unit.
And how much freedom does it have to customize that unit?
Yeah, so they were basically given, you can do whatever you want.
So if they want to add 5 bedrooms, maybe 5 bathrooms, they could?
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah,
so that was the biggest challenge by far. Because for those of you guys that don't know, on a building you typically have your plumbing, electrical, mechanical. There's typically stacks that run all the way up the entire building. And then they branch off at each floor to run, to specific units. So like you said, if the homeowner wanted to add 2 more bathrooms, we had to find some way to get that plumbing over there, get it in a wall, and sometimes we even had to get it in a CMU wall, masonry wall, and had to cut holes in it and everything like that. It was a daunting task.
In the instance of where like we have to consume when the person want the wood floor, they would tile there first, and you have to destroy everything.
No, so luckily with that person, they got in at the very beginning, and so all of their stuff was beforehand. But we have had instances where tile was down and they said, I don't like that. I want to go with this tile.
So there's no cut-off time of where you can stop?
We do everything we can to try to say, hey, this is the last date for customization. Yeah. It doesn't happen.
So regardless, you guys have to...
All we can do is say, hey, we would advise against this, but obviously if a homeowner is willing to pay all the money to demo it and reinstall it, then there's not really much that we can...
So usually they do pay up.
So what's the financial structure look like for you guys? Is it the developer that's holding the construction loan, and you guys are just doing the work?
Yes.
Okay.
So the big things that we actually started doing is, obviously with any project you have to have insurance on the job. There's 2 different types. The owner can hold the insurance over everybody, or the contractor can hold the insurance. And we actually make a lot of money when we hold the insurance, but there's a lot of risk there, because if somebody gets hurt on the job, we're responsible for paying those medical bills and that workers' comp. As far as the construction loan, yeah, we don't have any part of that. Sometimes we go and meet with when the developer's with the bank or whoever's financing the job, we will meet with them to figure out what the terms are, so that way we're familiar with it and we know that there's not going to be any issues in the future.
So is that part of like what your function is? Like you were mentioning, you guys are in different...
Yeah, that's definitely part of our job for sure. you know, I'd say the majority of our time is spent like creating RFIs, requests for information. If something's not clear on a drawing, we have to ask the question to an architect, to an engineer, to owner. Majority of my time is spent, you know, the owner knows he wants tile in the units, he doesn't know what tile he wants. So, you know, we're going to the tile broker saying, hey, can you please show us samples so that they can make their selection. Biggest thing I didn't touch on is with finishes, cabinets, mostly cabinets come from Italy. Anything that comes from Italy typically has a 10 to 12 week lead time, which means that we have to, I don't get to go out and measure from wall to wall to make sure that a cabinet's going to fit. I have to look at the plans and say, okay, hopefully we build this right and everything fits. So we have to order it 4 months in advance. So that's where it gets very stressful and difficult at times. So there's a lot of, we, in the office side, we're looking at the drawings basically. Field side, obviously, they're putting it up, you know, actually building it and everything like that.
Is there just one project engineer per project, or there's multiple?
It varies. It varies. So, like our port, we're doing some work at the Port of Fort Lauderdale here, and that's a $500 million job. There's 15 to 20 Boss employees on that job because of the size of it. On Adagio right now, there's me as a PE, there's an APM, a PM, and then we have 4 superintendents. And then we also have an intern on site as well.
Units, are there any particular load-bearing walls in there? Or?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So majority of it is columns. So I don't think I have a picture, but right over here to the side, majority of it is columns. It's not essentially a load-bearing wall, but there's columns in the middle of the units that are actually supporting the slide.
Being right on the river there, what kind of pilings and how many?
So Reba also has a basement that is below the water line. So fortunately for me, I was not there when they were dewatering, which means that, so we were digging out the ground there, putting in the pile caps, as you said. And they told me that they could not keep anything dry. They had water pumps pumping out water, putting it back into this river here, and they said it was an absolute nightmare. So luckily I was not there for that, so I can't touch on it too much. But the big issue they're having right now with residents is they have parking in the basement, and it's flooding all the time. Anytime it rains, it floods. And we told him it was going to happen. The developer was like, you know, I got it. He's got to meet certain parking requirements per units that he has. Yeah. He's like, we got to make this work. So yeah. All we can do at the end of the day is we build what's on the plans. I hear a lot of people say, why would you build it like that? Unfortunately, I can't. If I build something that's not on the plans, then we end up getting in a lot of trouble. So I can only advise, hey, this is probably not a good idea, but at the end of the day, they're going to do what they want to do. Yeah.
Typically, a lot of developers choose the ability to customize their units versus outright options.
No. So obviously, I've only worked on 2 jobs, and I don't know why I got so unlucky that they're both custom units, but these are the only jobs I've heard of that have had custom kind of. So, yeah, I would not recommend it. If you're going to do it, just make sure that you set a date for homeowners to say, look, we can't do any more customization here, because like she asked the question earlier, how long do we go before we say no? Well, if they're willing to pay the money, then we kind of have to give into them a little bit. But at the same time, we go back to the developer and say, okay, if we're going to do this, you need to extend our TCO date by a week, 2 weeks. And then that developer's like, oh no, we can't. We're not doing that for one homeowner, you know. So then that kind of puts the pressure back on the developer to say no. Yeah.
And how do you handle the permits when they're customized?
So, great question. So Fort Lauderdale, and again, I've only done work in Fort Lauderdale. I'm assuming this is how it is on other municipalities as well. You have to go in for what's called a DRC review. They meet once a month. So you have to have all your drawings updated. You submit to the DRC, they have to approve it, and then it gets brought to our job site so that it can be inspected and we can get sign-offs from the city or the private provider that we use. Now, if an inspector comes on site, let's say a big thing is electrical. The city charges per electrical box that you have in a condo unit. So if a homeowner adds 10 electrical boxes and an inspector walks in there, he's gonna say, I'm not inspecting this, your plans don't match what you built. So an inspector, we may explain to him, hey, look, this is a custom change, we're working on getting it permitted. He doesn't care. He's gonna be like, no, as for all I know, you guys just put all this stuff in there on your own. I'm not approving you on this. So again.
It's one by one at the end. You have to go back
Yeah.
with each apartment and say, well, approve this, approve that.
Yeah. Yep.
Do you do to control your cost of labor and material?
So we do everything we can. I mean, a big thing, as you guys may know, the tariffs kind of hurt pretty bad. Steel was a big one that got hit. Our contracts are 192 pages or something like that. They specify in there, like, look, once we enter in a contract with you, if there's material escalation costs or whatever it may be, it's kind of on the subcontractor to make it work. Now, with that being said, with the tariffs, we worked with subcontractors. We didn't say, hey, this is, you gotta eat all this. I know you didn't take this into account when you built out the job, but you gotta eat it. We help them out, we give them a little bit more money to make it work. But there's times where, let's say I have $100,000 to buy out drywall, and I only use $75,000 of that. Well, that's a $25,000 that I could use to maybe help the steel guy, the metal guy, you know, with his added costs. So it's all about just kind of, you know, balancing it out and trying to do everything you can to stay under budget.
So is that what your role is?
Yeah, mainly, yeah.
And you work hand in hand with the cost engineers, right? For that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So for me, their job is extremely difficult. They have to literally look at the plans and say, okay, how much is this going to cost? They have to sit down with the developer, say, what do you want to do? You know, do you want to do porcelain tile? Do you want to do VCT? Do you want to do carpet? You know, they have to go through all that stuff, get to a price, and a lot of times there's so much that goes on with construction and on the drawings that they're going to miss something. A big thing we had happen at Adagio is that our pre-con department, and I'm not in no way blaming them at all. Like I said, their job is extremely difficult. But they happened to miss like a whole section of roofing that we needed to do a membrane on. Ended up costing us about $50,000 that we had to eat. So that's obviously a big, you know, concern there.
What's the solution for the water that's keep pumping in the?
So they told me that they ended up bringing out, like, I think Bob Moss went out there one day and like no one could find an answer, and they eventually just got to the point where they bought a whole bunch of water pumps and had them staged like very close together, and were doing small sections, and they were able to get it dry enough where they could put the piles in. And again, I wasn't there for that, so I didn't really get to see it too much, but every time they talk about it, it sounds like a total nightmare.
Okay.
So what kind of project management software do you use?
We use a software called CMIC.
Okay.
It's pretty easy to use. Another one we use is called PlanGrid. PlanGrid is basically a drawing software, so that's where we upload all of our drawings, and it makes it very easy to send out to subs and do stuff like that. CMIC has basically got all of our financial information. It's where we create the RFIs, submittals, stuff like that.
Yeah, coming back to the permits. Once the developer finishes, like the first permit that you said, and then that's like a milestone, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then after that, the buyer, let's say, receives the apartment, and then he does the interior, and then he has to do the final permits.
Yes, the homeowner
Himself, it's up to him.
So once we get TCO and we fulfill all, so to get TCO, we have to close out all of our permits. So that includes all of the units in the building. So when we close out our permits, then they're allowed to open up their own permit and do whatever work they want to do in the unit. And that can be literally range from anything. So.
What you mentioned a warranty period before. How long is that for usually, and what
So-
does that cover?
So for the Florida statutes, I'm going to talk specifically about condos. So Florida statutes are very specific when it comes to contractors. We have a 1-year warranty period for units. That means, so, like, if your appliance doesn't work in that first year, and they find out it's defective work or whatever, we have to replace it for free. If the toilet doesn't work, if you find out there's a hollow tile, anything like that, we have to replace it. After that 1 year, the warranty period goes to 3 and 5 years. 5 years is typically for roofs. You can go up to a 20-year warranty for roofs depending on what you buy in the contract. 3 years is for the structure, plumbing, and mechanical that does not serve 1 unit. So it's the mechanical for the building. So that's what we're responsible for up to 3 years.
What about common areas, if something happens to a common area within that 1 year time period?
No, it'll be in that, so if it's mechanical or plumbing, it'll be in that 3 year, but if it's tile or something like that, it's just in that 1 year. Like I'm dealing, at Reba, I'm still dealing with like water leaks in units and stuff like that, and we have to go in and repair and do all the remedial work on our own time. We don't get paid for it.
All right, I got a comment. As I mentioned, a nice, wonderful children. I gotta get him out of his misery, but I think he enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Alright, we're going to load some PowerPoints here quickly. So this is the appropriate mode for a quick bathroom break if you want to run. Doug, this one? Top one? Nobody?
Yeah, that's it.
That's a PDF?
It's a PDF.
Oh, you want it as a... Let's see if the clicker works. Yep.
Yeah, that's Kona, right?
Yeah, Kona.
Yeah, but Kona couldn't make it, so...
No, I just say I recognize the logo.
Oh.
Yeah.
Can't have it. Can't have it.
That's a good thing.
Yeah,
That's called branding.
yes.
Do you need water? I make fresh coffee once in a
No water would be fine.
So, what I want to do now is I want to take that moment to introduce the two next speakers for the rest of the afternoon. And it's actually very interesting. Remember we talked earlier this morning and beginning of the afternoon about reputation, legacy, and how you network? So John Ropes and I have been sitting in the back in the corner and I've been talking a little bit about what Kyle's presenting and Kyle's background, and he's like, oh, is he responsible for this property, this property, this property? Because apparently they do business with each other as well. So you might not know, but he's been involved in somewhat with Reba, and you just sold a building.
Actually, it was a land use attorney that was in my building did it. I'm sure that the same land use attorney was getting the entitlements of the building that we just sold that Foss is going to build on the river.
So you can see there are connections, those lawyers, you know. So all I want to do is I want to introduce both of them, and then I think Doug is going first, and John, you chime in. They have different stories to tell, different experiences in the market, and I'm very delighted to actually have them here because the chemistry and the focus they present and the energy they present into focal point as the passion of their work is just amazing. Yeah? So it's a really great moment to ignite the fire in you guys for the rest of the semester and as a starting point for your careers. Yeah? For those who just started today in class and for those who are being sent off into the big wild world in a few weeks for graduation. So I would like to introduce John Ropes. Gentleman over there in blue. John Ropes is the founder and president of Ropes Associates Inc., a leading executive search and advisory firm. He is recognized as America's foremost expert in the recruitment and selection of senior management for developers of resort communities, large-scale master plan communities, as well as other developers and landowners in the field of real estate development or real estate. I am not going to list all the companies he has been working and advising with. I posted his bio on the Canvas webpage. Remarkable notion here is also that John Ropes is a governor of the ULI. You heard the Urban Institute multiple times this morning being reflected. So he is a foundation of this over his career. And then finally here, which is kind of funny because he made that comment already this afternoon, as an owner and developer of an office building, now apparently under contract or in negotiations.
Actually, it's sold.
Yeah, sold. Of an office building in downtown Fort Lauderdale, John has been active in area organizations. He is a former chairman and now currently serves as the board of the Downtown Development Authority of Fort Lauderdale, the Riverwalk Trust Board, and he also serves on my advisory board. And I'm thanking him very much to be here today. This young gentleman is a different person. I'm really blessed that you're here. Thank you for picking up my phone on Monday. If I call you on a Monday, it might be the reason because you might be coming to my class on a Saturday. So I owe you a pleasure. Yeah. Douglas Smith. He's the president and principal of EDSA Plan. It's not EDSA, it's EDSA Plan. Through his career, Doug has worked to advance the role of landscape architect as a leader in responsible land use and site development by combining design, technology, and strategy to create successful places. We had places as a buzzword earlier. I'm pretty sure he will give us a lot of visuals, a lot of background, how his understanding of places will work with the philosophy of his own career and the company. Grounded in an inclusive, integrative, problem-solving approach, his multifaceted skills enable him to effectively transcend any design challenge with relevant and meaningful design solutions. Let that sink in. That's a very positive approach on everything you can do in work. Shut this a little bit short here as well. In his role as president, Doug is responsible for the leadership and management of the 125-person firm, as well as running his own EDSA studio team. Yeah? And what I like about EDSA leaders, they have a quote on their webpage. While your reputation is measured by your ability to lead and influence, how you treat people is what will be remembered most. We have built our business on long-term relationships. And I use one of his quotes in my classes all the time. Every time you start doing a studio project-based, team-based project with me, the quote, here's the door, put your ego, leave your ego at the door and work in a team, that's coming from him. That said, I'm blessed to have you guys here, and I hope the students will enjoy as much as your presentations as I. Thank you.
John, how are we going to?
Well, I think you're going to start.
Okay.
The visuals I have.
Okay, all right. Okay, great.
Put the clicker up
all right.
so that should work.
Let's see if we can make this work. So, you know, the real estate industry is a small world. We've done a lot of work with Moss over the years, and you know, I know Bob Moss pretty well. John Ropes has done a lot of interaction with EDSA over the years, and we were just talking off on the side about some work 25, 30 years ago in Saudi Arabia, actually, because there's a bit of a rebirth happening in Saudi Arabia. A lot of projects happening there because of government initiatives, because of cultural change that's happening. And for the last 2 months, that's been about 85% of my time is working with our team to get some of that moving. So the interactions of these companies, which are all local companies, go back a long, long time. And I think you'll find in the real estate world, those interconnections are everywhere. And so it's important, this idea that Thomas said, you know, about your reputation and it's the way you deal with people and treat people, it's so true. It's such a small industry, you can't afford to do anything that's going to burn bridges. And the idea of teamwork and checking your ego at the door is not my quote. I actually stole it from our founder, Ed Stone, who John knew very well. He's passed away now. But so what I thought I'd do today, based on what Thomas explained to me about the class, is first of all very interactive. Please interrupt me, ask any questions you want to ask about anything as we go through any of this conversation. I thought what I'd do is give you a sense of how our company is set up and what we do, because we're a little different. We're kind of a niche profession out there in the real estate world. Landscape architecture, you may have heard what that is. If you ask the average person on the street if they've ever heard of landscape architecture, they'll say yes. And if you ask them what it is, most people don't really know exactly what that means. So I'm going to give you a sense and a flavor of what that is, at least for our firm. And we are considered, in this small niche profession, one of the largest pure land planning landscape architecture practices in the country, but probably also in the world. And when I say pure, what I mean is there's a lot of big firms that are interdisciplinary. They'll offer architecture, engineering, etc. We've stuck to just our wheelhouse of land use planning, landscape architecture, urban design, and actually we're launching now a themed entertainment team and studio within the company as well. So with that, just to give you a sense of what our role is in the design process and the development process, and hopefully give you a little bit of sense also of what that process is all about just in general. We do a lot of large-scale land planning, land use planning. And when you talk about landscape architecture, there are a lot of landscape architects that don't get into that aspect of this profession, meaning master planning and land use planning at almost sort of a regional scale. I have one case study to give you a sense of what that scale is all about. A lot of landscape architects are dealing with sort of site plan level down to the detail of the site development, and I'll share with you a little bit of that as an example as well. That is Ed Stone, so EDSA is Edward D. Stone Jr. and Associates. That was the foundation. Years ago, we used to go by Edward D. Stone Jr. and Associates, which was a mouthful. We figured out it was smarter to make that an acronym, EDSA, back in the 90s. So again, planning, landscape architecture, urban design, themed entertainment design. Our clients come from these various places. Private sector is where we do really probably the bulk of our work through developers, private landowners, etc. But we also do work, we try to keep a fairly balanced portfolio of work in the public sector as well, working for cities, states, even federal at times, local governments. And then a lot of our work comes through these relationships again with the architects, engineers, and other people in the real estate industry that we work with. So we consider all those people part of the network of leads and possibilities to bring work in the door. We have 5 office locations. We are founded and headquartered here in Fort Lauderdale. We're also in Baltimore, New York, Orlando, and back in the early 2000s, we went to China in a serious way before a lot of other U.S. companies, U.S. design companies did, and established ourselves there. Started off in Beijing, but we're now in Shanghai there. And so that's been great to sort of build upon what we started there in Asia. We have the way we structure the company is in a series of teams, so about 130 people, as it says there. That is broken down into teams, so again, this idea of teamwork becomes very important. And it's a way for us to organize a fairly large group of people that are both design and sort of administration of the firm, but into teams of people to have good contact and relationships built with specific clients to serve the needs of specific projects, and to have a kind of cohesive team that follows that process all the way through from the early first handshake and ideation and concept all the way through, hopefully, to an implementation of some kind. So a studio is led by a principal and has a hierarchy of people, and we found over time that the ideal studio size, if there's one principal involved, is 12, 14, 15 people, and when it starts to get beyond that number, the quality control is lost a little bit. And It's interesting, if you look in the animal world and natural systems, you know, packs of animals and groups of animals, there's that same kind of number that's kind of interesting about how that works. Yeah.
So wondering, I never asked that question, but wondering about your hiring process then. If I would come, landscape architect reflect on it, someone would ask you to, would be working with you or applying for your job, would you actually have all the studio leaders as part of the hiring process, or do you have like just 4 or 5 and then you evolve into the company? Because I know companies where you meet every director of the development branch, even if you're hired as a technical analyst.
Yeah. So the answer is we don't have every single principal because it's frankly impossible to do that. We're spread out in all these various places. And what we try to do is actually get a cross-section of people involved in the interview process and the evaluation process. And so we'll even have people that have only been with the firm for a couple of years be involved in interviewing, because they might have a different kind of level of connection with somebody that's also coming, you know, right out of a college program. The other thing we do is we have a very strong internship program. And so a lot of our hires really, frankly, come through that process because it's an opportunity for us to get to, you know, see what their attitudes and work skills and so forth are, but also it's an opportunity for those people that are interning to see if this is a place they'd like to be for, you know, to start their career or hopefully have a long go at it. So we do internships through the entire year, and a lot of college programs now have whole semesters where they send the students out to either do an internship or study abroad or something of that nature. So it's fairly common. So we get a steady flow all through the year of interns. And in the summers, which is the heavier influx, I mean, it's not unusual for us to have 12 or 15 interns coming in at one time. So we work across these various, what we call market sectors. We have done, and John will tell you this as well, I think we're most well known in the hospitality realm. We do a lot of resort hotels, have done that for nearly 60 years across the world. Next year will be the 60th year of EDSA. But again, urban environments, which is, for us is a bit of a focus right now as well because of the urbanization that's happening across the globe and the need for good urban planning and good city planning. And so, you know, we're focused on that as well right now. But the other thing about all these sectors is they really all overlap one another. Almost every project nowadays has some aspects of some of those various sectors mixed together. There's rarely a case where you see a sort of a one-trick pony development anymore. And so, you know, master planned residential communities are designed like resorts, and they have commercial elements. And resorts have, you know, residential real estate components, and cities mix all of these things together. So there's just a lot of crossover we find more and more with all of these sectors. We've always been a very global company from the very start. And Ed Stone had that vision when he started the company, and one of the reasons that he came out of Harvard and came to South Florida was because he really felt that was a strategic place at the doorstep of Latin America, and especially as in the late 50s, early 60s, and the jet transportation was really starting to develop, and how that was going to open up the hospitality world. And he had that vision. He could understand that was happening. So that was part of the reason he came to South Florida. But you can see the concentration of dots sort of across the equatorial belt there where you would typically find a lot of the resort developments across the world. So, you know, getting back to these comments that Thomas started with about how teamwork is so important in all of this development process. And these two guys will say the same thing, I'm sure. It takes a team of experts to put it all together. we do get an opportunity to be, in some cases, the team leader, meaning in a lot of cases, because if there's a raw piece of land that's perhaps a green field or even brown field, it's undeveloped, a lot of times we're the first consultant to the table, and so there are many times when we help the client assemble the right team of experts, depending on where the project is and what the attributes are. And so this is just an example of the various kinds of disciplines that typically would be involved. And again, the check the ego at the door, very important. The good ideas and the experience come from every portion of that diagram there. So very important that everybody, I think, understands that going in. So when you go to school for architecture or anything in the design field and land planning, landscape architecture, there's a process that they start to teach you at that point. Sometimes I think it probably doesn't sink in until you really start to apply it in real life. But this is this isn't proprietary to EDSA at all, but what we've defined as the planning process, and it's been a way for us. We have a whole document on this that we share with clients sometimes, because we find that just because somebody owns land doesn't mean they really understand the best way to approach, or the best approach to undertake a development process. And so we find ourselves educating, in some cases, our clients or landowners. And so it really starts with defining the vision of the project. What is it you want to try to accomplish? And then there's the inventory and analysis is very, very important to our process, because the context, the physical aspects, the political aspects of the situation, all are influences to how you might proceed with either a vision or the process to carry out that vision. So we do a lot of physical analysis of land as part of our contribution to the process. There are other consultants that might contribute on, let's say, understanding what the infrastructure availability is, the political climate, certainly the market around the potential development. There are consultants who just do market research, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And then you move from that inventory, which starts to inform what you might do with a piece of property, the conceptual aspect of this. Typically, at least in public projects, there's a community input aspect of it, number 4. Then you're moving into either a master planning or site planning element, and then refining as you go through. Finally, you get to what we're calling detailed design, where you've organized the overall plan. Now you're designing all the elements of the plan, be it architecture, site, infrastructure, utilities. And you go through a process there of schematic and then design development, construction documentation, and then you obviously get it built. That's where obviously MOS comes into play. But actually MOS would come into play also potentially in the detailed design stage as well, right? Because there's a lot of different formats of how projects get built these days. And design build is a very common, more common format all the time, where contractor and design team get together earlier in the process to track on budget, to track on constructability, you can track on availability of materials and so forth. So a little bit, this, again, hearkening back to the comments from Thomas here at the beginning, and this is more relevant to an EDSA, but the culture of companies to me is very important, and I've learned that over the years how important that really is. There was a very strong culture established within EDSA by Ed Stone and the founding partners, and I'm just to let you know, I'm sort of the 3rd generation now leadership of the firm, so over a 6-year time frame. But Ed and the original partners really set the tone, and we work very hard as a company to continue on building on that foundation, You know, I would encourage you as you get into a position where you're going to be employed somewhere out in the business world to really look at the culture of that company and understand what that's all about. Because, you know, a job is a job, but then you're going to spend a lot of time with these people, and you're going to spend a lot of time, you know, doing the tasks that you're asked to do. And the work environment around you is so very important to how good you're going to feel about what you're doing. And so we work very hard at it. These are some core values that we've defined for our own company. But again, I would encourage you just to sort of seek that out for your potential employers and ask them about that. You know, how do they define that for themselves? And I think will tell you a lot about what the company's all about. One of the things that we're all aware of more and more these days is what does it mean to do sustainable design? And there's a lot of certification types of programs out in the world. LEED is one that everybody's familiar with. We developed our own sort of system to help us get better internally with the work we're doing at integrating sustainable design practices into the work that we're doing. And so it's all about what you build, what is the performance of that project, whatever it may be. And it's really measured more so in how it performs after you've cut the ribbon. But there are a lot of things you can do in the design process. And so we put together this document that we call performance-based design. And we're working very hard to integrate it more so into our thought process at the very beginning of a project. And essentially it's a whole series of topics. And under each topic there are a series of things that you could do. So for instance, water resources is a topic. There's a lot of things you can do to be more sustainable in the design approach of the project. And so we picked a few things for every project, set some goals at the beginning. There's always a baseline of the status quo of how it's normally done. And our goal is how do we improve upon that in the performance of the project. And then we figure out ways to try to measure that not only during the design process but after the project completion. So this is something that's we're working at. It's a living, breathing document. It's not trying to replace LEED or any of these other programs, but it's just a way for us to try to get better internally. And then the principles that I think that cross over again, all of these different project types, the design principles and the development principles. And these may seem fairly simplistic in a way, but they're things that we always go back to and kind of check ourselves as we go through a process with the whole team. And so, you know, creating a unified vision, making sure the project is done in a way that's going to be economically viable. I know that these sound like common sense things, but believe me, they're things that you have to work at in the process of creating a project. Design for memorable experiences. What we do is a lot about the human experience in these projects, and so human scale and human experience is important. This encouraging healthy living is about health and wellness, but it's also about how communities and places work and live, and the social connectivity people have with one another, the physical connectivity of, you know, streets and public places and so forth. So that encompasses a lot of different things. Again, I talked about human scale, and connectivity. So those are sort of common themes that we just seem to be a thread through a lot of the work that we do. Now, just to give you a sense of the kinds of projects, I'm going to give you, this is sort of a wide variety of things in different time periods of the history of the firm, just to give you a sense of some of the projects. This is the PepsiCo World Headquarters up in upstate New York, or north of New York City, Purchase, New York. It was one of the flagship projects of the firm. It goes back to the late 60s. And again, Ed and some of the original partners, you know, obviously were involved in this. Ed Stone's father was a prominent architect, Edward D. Stone Sr., had his practice in New York. And he happened to be the architect that you can see in the upper right there. He was the architect of the campus, or the buildings on the campus. So this was actually one of the first opportunities for senior and junior to work together, which was very interesting. And it's, they moved the headquarters of Pepsi out of New York City. The project, in a way, was really well ahead of its time because it went out into sort of a suburban area. It was an old polo field. But the way the campus worked was that you parked on a parking lot in the perimeter, you walked through the woods to get to the buildings in the center. So there was sort of this interaction with nature and decompression. And they found that worker productivity and went up, absenteeism went down. It's all the things that we really think about now in terms of what's a healthy workplace and lifestyle. And that project was doing those things, 40, 50 years ago. And it's won a lot of awards over time. It's one of the largest outdoor sculpture gardens in the U.S. as well. So it's been a really neat thing for us to be involved with. You might recognize some images here. EDSA has been the master planner at large for Nova Southeastern for more than 15 years now, I think. And probably a lot of what you see on campus in terms of site design that we've been involved in over time. So Kona Gray, who maybe some of you have met, has led the charge on a lot of that work. This is a boutique resort in Tuscany, in Italy, Castiglione del Bosco. This was done for the Ferragamo family. You may recognize that name from the clothing industry. They bought this, I think it was about 4,500 acres of land, but on this hilltop was an old Borgio, which was a little sort of farm village, and it was all converted to an upscale boutique resort. So our partner, who now heads up our Baltimore office, led this project. And again, this is one of those, comes along every once in a while, very unique, one-of-a-kind place in the world. And you're probably all familiar with the Atlantis Resort. So back in 1992, I think it was, we had this guy from South Africa show up in our office on like a Saturday morning. And he said, I'm going to, I have this vision to do this mega resort in the Bahamas on Paradise Island. And so that was the beginning of envisioning what Atlantis could be and creating the storyline for that. We worked closely with WATG, a big resort architecture firm that did all that building design that you see. But we did all the site design. At one time, this was the largest outdoor aquarium in the world. I don't think it has that title any longer, but this really did change tourism in the Bahamas in a significant way, and as probably most of you are familiar. And part of that was Saul Kirshner and Sun International recognized how important service is in the resort environment, and that they really had to go in and change the mindset in the Bahamas of what that meant, and retrain our people on that. So this is kind of Las Vegas East, if you will. Ed always used to refer to it that way, but there's a lot happening there, and we continue to have assignments to update places and expand places around this complex, even today, just going back to 1992. This is in China. This is another. This is an eco lodge, so another boutique resort, small. Offering of hotel rooms, probably like 50 or 60 keys total, but in a very unique setting in a bamboo forest in southern China. And as you can see, the architecture very much utilizes bamboo for the design and structure. Yeah? This is supports bamboo. Yeah, so we brought a Colombian architect in Colombia, South America, who specializes in bamboo architecture into the project, and he was responsible for working with us designing these. So that is a bridge. When you arrive, you go through that bridge over a river to get to the main complex. That whole bridge is built out of bamboo and concrete. The roof tiles that you see there were repurposed from a local village where they were taking down a whole bunch of buildings. So, and part of the design process in this one was involving those local villagers in the thought process, and also a feng shui master to help understand in Asian culture how the place should really set up for the best qi and energy and so forth. And then, you know, sort of a completely different environment. This is in Dubai, Medina Jumeirah. This is one of the projects, one of the first projects in Dubai that said, you know what, let's use more of the local Arabian sort of vernacular of architecture rather than ultra-modern, ultra-contemporary style. And you can see the Burj Al Arab in the background, which is not part of this development, but it just is very prominent on the skyline there. So there's a contrast, but this was a huge mixed-use development. It's been very, very popular as a destination in Dubai. There's a hotel, there's a shopping area within. It's called the Souk in the Middle East.
Actually, I can imagine that one. I see it right there.
You were there, huh?
Yes,
Okay.
It's absolutely beautiful. You
Yeah.
can sit there all day. You don't want to leave.
So,
Right here, I sit right there.
okay, good. And you can see all the water in the context of this. So this part of this was bringing water in from the Gulf and networking it into the project and moving people around on these small boats that are fashioned after the historic little boats that move people and goods up and down Dubai Creek. So again, it's part of the sort of storyline and theme that goes into this kind of work. This is in Eastern Europe, in the country of Montenegro, which used to be part of Yugoslavia. If you go to the heel of the boot of Italy and go straight to the east across the Adriatic, you land in Montenegro. It's a small country, but beautiful place. And I've had the pleasure of being involved in this from the master plan all the way through now, construction of the early stages of it. There's a hotel in place there now. But it's basically, you can see the terrain, very steep hillside location right on the Adriatic Sea. Marina, mixed use, hotel. Basically, it's a mixed use resort, fashioned after a historic hillside town in Eastern Europe. There's also an interesting place out in the Mediterranean, the island of, or the country of Malta, but the capital city is Valletta. And this is the historic port where now all the cruise ships come in and dock. But a consortium of private and public sector got together and to renovate these historic storefronts. So those buildings there date back to the 17th century, and 16th century. And they were on the waterfront there, just really falling into ruin. So there was a vision to bring them back to their glory and turn this into a mixed-use retail dining venue. And so, and part of what we did was through some exploration of history, we found that the original waterfront was along this area, this far in front of the shops, where this had all been filled and paved over. So we actually removed a bunch of paving and fill to expose the old historic waterfront. And then you will all recognize, being here in Fort Lauderdale, the beach statement, the Fort Lauderdale beach revitalization, renovation that happened back started in the late 80s, right at about the time I landed in EDSA. And more or less was completed, the public infrastructure that's completed in the early 90s. And it really changed the face of brand and tourism for Fort Lauderdale. That was when the city fathers wanted to phase spring breakout, which they successfully did. And now, if you go up and down A1A through this stretch of the beach, obviously there's been a lot of private investment there and upscale hotels, and the tide of the tourism has changed there over the last 25, 30 years. Recently.
And the parking lot you see to the left is going to be redeveloped now as a park.
Yeah.
Yeah, are you guys doing that park?
Yeah, we're doing this as well. And
Oh, they are.
so what's happening right now is if you go down there, there's a big parking structure that's nearly complete here. Architectonica out of Miami is doing that. But as part of a master plan that we're involved in, to provide public parking here and then promenade for people to get to the beach. And then this, there was, back in the day, there was a hotel here that was Grand Central for spring break. That was torn down probably in the early 90s, late 80s. And it's been sort of a placeholder public parking here, but obviously very...
That's Las Olas.
Yeah, this is Las Olas. And A1A. This is the elbow room right here.
Yep.
I don't remember what was here. John, do you?
It was
the name of it was. But in any case, this now is, we've done the plans to turn this whole area into a big public realm open space, a park, a place for people to gather, a place for events to happen, including being able to close off this block of A1A, or sorry, of Las Olas as it leads to A1A to in special event timeframes that this all becomes one space. And so you will all see this, if you go to the beach, you'll see this come to fruition.
I saw them building something on it. What's going to be in the park area?
In the park area, back in here.
Yeah, I saw it.
There's going to be sort of a visitor center, drop-off restrooms. That kind
Got it.
of thing.
Okay, so yeah, I just knew it was a park. I just didn't know you guys were building on it.
Right. So that's been fun for us to continue to be involved
I wanted to ask, and please excuse my ignorance, but in my mind, whenever I hear master plan and I'm looking at these different things, right, what's your engagement model and how are you engaged with the developers, or are you the developers and architects too?
So in this case, all of this work, the client was the city of Fort Lauderdale.
Sure.
And part of the reason that, going back now to the late 80s, early 90s, that this project was envisioned, part of it was that the city fathers decided they wanted to change tourism on Fort Lauderdale Beach. It was the gem of Broward County, but it really become blighted, quite honestly, and a lot of that was because of the spring break activity. But they also had some serious issues with stormwater drainage and so forth along the A1A corridor. And so that was another impetus to do the work. So this is, this is really an example. There was a master plan involved in this project because you may not know, but the previous version of Fort Lauderdale Beach was sand, a low concrete block wall, angle parking right behind that wall, right? And then about 5 lanes of traffic, and then about a 2-foot wide sidewalk on the west side of the street, and then t-shirt shops and bars, and there was just no place really for pedestrians. And so the master plan in this case was about, and this was controversial at the time, was removing parking off that beachfront, right? And giving that space back to pedestrians. And what do you do with that parking? So part of the project wasn't just what happens along A1A, but all the side streets in those back blocks that accommodate now public parking, that's where all that parking went. And then there was a whole strategy of certain streets that lead you to the beach portals that we called people streets in that case. And then these pylons and so forth that sort of create the portals at the end of those people streets. So there was a whole master plan, if you will, but it was really about the site design of creating all of this.
You mentioned the parking deck back there. I just, personal curiosity, do you know if they kick themselves over not doing the Plaza Las Olas?
Oh,
the plaza?
Yeah. Back, you're saying back in
right where that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, all I can tell you is I know over years and years there have been all kinds of proposals for what to do in this big public parking lot. There's a marina back here, as you know, it's a city marina. There's a potential development site right here. There have been, I don't know how many, tens of different kinds of proposals from private developers to the city of what could or should happen on these sites. Obviously, you get into a pretty publicly charged environment because of these residents here, because of the residents on the west side of the Intracoastal. And so, for whatever reasons, over decades of different proposals, this is the one that's finally, people have agreed that, it's a viable thing to do.
And that's an incredible accomplishment, honestly, because I read the minutes from a lot of those. So you guys must have faced a daunting task.
They get contentious, that's for sure. And that's part of, the process of getting things approved and bringing them to bear. I think this is the last one yet. This is back to the Middle East in a place called Al Ain, which is, if you sort of draw a triangle between Dubai, Abu Dhabi, which are both on the Gulf, on the coast, but they go inland. There's a city called Al Ain. This is a big mixed-use project that is based mostly on the idea of creating this deserts of the world environment and almost a zoo type of experience. What's the Disney's Animal Kingdom? It's sort of an Animal Kingdom type of development, but with hotels and residential components and so forth. And a good bit of this has been built in terms of the central facilities here, and then there's excursions that take you out into these environments where you, just like Animal Kingdom, you see the animals up close in their kind of native environment.
In the jungle instead of the jungle. It's you in the jungle.
Yes, you go into their environment instead of
theirs and
right.
them into yours.
That's right.
I like that.
Yeah.
Where'd you get the water from?
Well, there's not a lot of water involved in this one.
Okay.
Because you're in an inland location. But water for the development, I mean, there's a whole hydrologic study that comes along with all of these projects. So, I can tell you, because John and I were just chatting about, again, what's happening in Saudi Arabia right now. So we're just right in the thick of this, but a lot of water for irrigation is coming from treated sewage effluent that, in the case of the project we're just getting involved in, is coming from the city of Reba. So, water everywhere in the world is a precious resource, and so we have to be very creative about how we accomplish these things. So, I don't know, maybe if we want to take a break, I put a couple of case studies in here. One is larger scale planning exercise, and then the other is more like a detailed design resort exercise, and maybe we change it up a little bit and John jumps in, or I don't know how you guys want to do it.
I am, from my side, completely flexible on that one. I know it's 2:30, students are starting to get tired and aching. But I think if you want to do the large scale case study, and then John, you chime in, where would you like to come in?
It doesn't matter to me. One of the things you forgot to mention right when you started the firm, what got them the thing on in the beach is they did Riverwalk, and Riverwalk is a game changer in Fort Lauderdale. It's evolving, and you've stayed involved with it throughout the thing. They did a phenomenal job with our Riverwalk downtown, which is right now where the St. Patrick's Day parade is taking place. And it has changed the complexity because at the time it started, there was only one office building on the water in all of downtown Fort Lauderdale. I mean, it's where you put parking lots, it's where you put the newspaper plant, you put all those kinds of things. It just happened to be my office building, but that's so I could take a boat to work. But
awesome.
Riverwalk changed things. And through that, there's been hundreds of millions of dollars worth of development. As you go to walk on the Riverwalk, you look, I mean, you're in a canyon. I mean, all the high-rise apartment complexes and whatnot, and it's activated, and there's events going on all the time. It's really made the city. So it was much of a change in downtown Fort Lauderdale, which is what the idea was, is what happened on the beach. And I think it was an extension of what you did on the beach. I mean, what you did in Riverwalk that led you into the beach.
Yeah, you're right. Those were the two big public works projects of the early 90s that were in the vision of the city fathers that said we need to change the brand of the city, but we also need to change sort of the livability of the city and take advantage of these assets that we're sort of turning our back on. And I remember actually EDSA, both of those commissions were, the interviews and so forth happened within just a couple of months of each other. And EDSA happened to be awarded both projects, and there was a lot of outcry about how unfair that was that one firm would win both projects. But it served us well, actually, when there was an economic slowdown in the early 90s, that we had these big public projects that sort of pushed us right through.
One of the things you talked about, just to chime in, is, you know, it's a collaborative effort to do a large-scale development. And when you start on a 10 or 15-year project, that project doesn't stay static, it changes. And you have to change with the marketplace, the things that you learn as you're going along. And especially in the destination, our spaces, like this, we have the biggest practice in the world in finding folks to run large-scale destination developments around the world. We've not done it in as many countries. We've been in about 22, 23 different countries, and across the U.S. and Hawaii and so forth. But the key is experience. And notice how your plans have changed, you know, through the years based on experience that you learned in doing these developments. And people look, whether they're from Russia, whether they're from China, whether they're from Saudi Arabia, they're all looking for the same thing, because, you know, they have a leveling thing called the internet. So people understand product and they understand lifestyle. You're not creating product, you're really creating lifestyle, and what you're given a product to fit that lifestyle. They're creating the ambience that makes that lifestyle come to life. And because you're really selling a dream. In a second home environment, absolutely no, it's the hardest thing to develop there is. And it's because what you're selling, no one needs. They want, but they don't need it. In a primary home, you need a home. You're either going to buy from this location or you're going to buy from that location. But you don't need a second home, or a third home, or a fourth home, or a fifth home, or whatever it happens to be. So what you're really buying is a lifestyle and an experience. So you have to not only create that lifestyle, but you have to execute that lifestyle, which you're talking about the project afterwards. And you're talking about sustainability. Very important, but architecture is sustainability as well. You know, if you look at some of the really sustainable architecture, it was designed over 100 years ago. In some cases, 200, 300, 400 years ago. The architecture lasts. We look at local architects like Abreu and Meisner. You know, their architecture is timeless. And then you look at stuff that we built in the 60s that was nice and cute, boxy and whatever. It didn't last. You know, it was nice for the decade, but so, you know, architecture as well as landscape, it needs to be sustainable. It needs to be as relevant 20 years from now as it is, you know, when you're starting the project. And getting back to your vision, you do your best work. Consultants do their best work if they have a good client. And experience is the sum of your mistakes. If you've never done it before, you're going to gain some valuable experience. And you know, some of the things that just make common sense that you do don't work. And so you now gain some experience. You learn what questions to ask. If you know what questions to ask, you can be successful in a lot of these developments. But experience and having people, that's where we come in. We bring in people that have done this before and done it successfully. So they've already made their mistakes on somebody else's nickel. And if you have a good client, you're going to do better work. An architect is going to do better work on a physical building if he has a good client, where that client drives what he needs, knows what he wants, knows what the vision is, can explain it, and then drives it. So it's all about a collaborative effort, but you can't miss a piece of it. I mean, they're all important. The ambiance that's created, I think landscape architecture and planning is, I mean, when you walk into a resort and you walk around that resort, you get a sense, you get a feeling. Well, that feeling was created. You know, it probably didn't exist. It was probably gravel or it was it was grass or it was something else, but you're creating an experience that's blending itself in with what that, what the developer wanted to achieve. And he was able to articulate that vision. You were able to execute that vision. And if there's a golf course, they're not so popular these days, but the golf course architects in the 80s, they used to build golf courses that pros used to like to play. Well, most of us that play golf are not pros. And so we like, our best golf course is one that's the most fun. So the one that doesn't beat us up. And so what they had to learn is golf course architects like Palmer and Nicholas and Fazio was always very generous, Pete Dye and some of the others, they built courses that you couldn't, the average golfer couldn't play. A pro might like it. You know, like Sawgrass that you're looking at right now in the Players Championship. You know, that was, I think that was a Pete Dye course. You know, that was a course that's very difficult for the average player to play. But if you make, and if you got one that's really difficult and you got one that's really easy, guess which gets the most play? And so these are experiences that you had to learn the hard way, and you had to work with the golf course architect and get him to understand. And the ego at the door, these guys, some of them have some of the biggest egos you've ever met. And so you have to explain what you need in order to achieve what you want to get. And now you'll find that most golf courses that are developed, that have been developed in the last 20 years, are very playable courses. The ones that people can have an experience, but yet a pro could go on and find challenging as well. So it's a very interactive business.
Yeah, well put. You covered some things that I failed to say, I think. So, so maybe we'll do this as I'll go through this first example again. This is large scale planning view of things, and then maybe we can break and have a little more conversation. And again, anybody please stop me anywhere along the way if you want to ask questions. So this is some work that we did just a few years ago for a company called DevCo, which is really the development company of the Port Authority on the island of Grand Bahama. And familiar with Bahamas, you know, Grand Bahama, the west end of Grand Bahama is literally only about 65 miles from West Palm Beach, so it's pretty close. But the Port Authority, which was created, it's sort of a free trade zone on Grand Bahama. It was created back in the 50s. It's all of that red area on the map there. It's about 175,000 acres, I think, that this authority was set up to oversee and control development processes and sort of the economic aspect of what was happening within that zone. They had, in the, I guess, late 50s, moving into the 60s and 70s, they did a lot of really kind of weird platting of big chunks of land, and then they'd bring junkets of people over, they'd put them in the casino for a day or two, and then they'd sell them property. So you'll see the result of some of that in part of what we're looking at here. It's kind of an interesting thing. But now, this sort of current generation of the Port Authority, and if you've been to Grand Bahama, it's going through a tough time right now. It really had its heyday in probably in the 60s and 70s, maybe moving into the 80s, and then it's been on a little bit of a downward spiral. There's a lot of properties that are really run down there. Not a lot of tourism activity there, but they have the assets in place, and especially that they're so close to Florida, and it's easy to get to. So there's a lot of reasons why it makes sense to create a destination here, and they sort of struggle to figure that out. This is a case where this study and this undertaking of a certain area, and I'll describe it more, but it's about 75,000 acres of the overall land holding of DevCo. We worked with Ernst & Young. So Ernst & Young in this case did all the market research. Ernst & Young, you know, probably know that company. They're sort of a global financial company, but they all in management. But they have a sector of their business that does market research for real estate. And a guy named Mark Blunt heads that team out of Miami. So we worked with Mark and his team
And they did this market research in this case, and they looked at these aspects, you know, the business climate, the idea of attracting a new generation of users to the island, looking at the opportunities there, thinking about literally innovation districts. So thinking beyond just the standard sort of resort play, what could happen there in Grand Bahama because of its proximity and because of the way the business world works now. It's a lot more can be done, you know, over the airwaves, and you don't have to physically be located in a specific place. And this is, I'll just blow through this fairly quickly, but this is some of the results of the market study where they looked at the business climate. They did study this idea of innovation districts and what that could mean to some potential development there on Grand Bahama to sort of re-kickstart some economic activity there. There were a number of concepts that were curated between us and Ernst & Young and the client about what kinds of things could happen: commercial village, marina, live workplaces, a town center area. Obviously, you have opportunities for hotel because they still have beautiful water, beautiful beaches. You could have vacation homes. We talked about medical tourism. We talked about meeting and retreat activities. So there's a lot of different things that were looked at that could happen. And how might those happen over time, given the land attributes, which I'll get to. And then some understanding of you know, what the use is, how you position it, how you support it, how much space you need, and so forth. So this is all part of that market research effort. Yes?
So you guys are developers?
No. We're a design firm. Okay, so the developer in this case, well, the landowner is the client. And in this case, the idea of doing all of this work is to bring developers to the table. Okay? So there, you get all these different combinations of how the process and the players work. But in this case, we have a landowner, or in this case, it's a government, quasi-government agency that controls the land and is responsible to do something.
So you're setting up the value prop to bring the developers.
Exactly, to lure or attract developers to the table. And the government of the Bahamas ultimately was the client in this case because the Port Authority has to answer back to the government as well. So at the end of this process, we presented all this information to basically a cabinet of people at the government level.
Do you guys just flat fee, or do you have a residual equity?
That's an interesting question. We usually, I say usually, I don't know, we have probably over time taken an equity position in some projects as in lieu of fee. I can tell you that didn't necessarily work out so well in most cases. And so, in fact, EDSA has little parcels of land spread in different places because that happened in some of the early years. But you know, I think we talk a lot about that as a partnership. Is, you know, the value we bring sometimes is we feel a lot more than the fee we get paid. But so do we take a position in projects or not? But the way we're set up as a consulting firm is that we consult for a fee. That's really, and we're not developers. We provide, you know, our expertise and recommendations to the process. So again, each of these different categories of potential development and looking at how you position, how you support all of these: resort lodging, meetings, retreats, medical tourism. And so that was really skimming very quickly through a lot of information that goes into the market research aspect of it. But it becomes sort of the foundation of the process. Then the next aspect is to look at the land and understand what the land is all about. And then eventually you marry the market research and all that information up to the attributes of the land, and that's how the planning process starts to evolve. So this was a really interesting exercise, I think you'll find. So outlined in red here is a 75,000 acre area of land that's part of the Port Authority's land control. Back in the, probably, again, late 50s, they built, which you could never probably do environmentally today, but they built this, dredged this channel that goes all the way through the island from south to north. The best beaches are all along the southern coast. The northern edge of Grand Bahama Island is mostly wetland, so it's in a lot of ways very sensitive to that aspect. But they built this channel, and again, you could probably never get that permitted in today's environment, but they did it. Because of that, they actually do have some saltwater intrusion into some natural freshwater lenses that are in this part of the island, so that's something we had to pay very close attention to, is how do you protect those assets. But at the same time, that channel in itself is an asset. It brings water into the land, and so you'll see how we thought about capitalizing on that. This is just a topographic analysis. This part of the island very flat. And again, you can see 0 to 2 feet elevation, or 2 to 4 is most of that northern coastal area. If there's any topography at all, it gets up to 14, 16 feet. It's on a ridge line, sort of right behind the coast there on the south edge. Now, this is the pattern of platted land that they created, again, going back into the 1960s to sell property. It's kind of bizarre. And you saw this happen in parts of Florida as well, the General Development Corporation.
Atlantic Gulf.
Yeah, they did these big land development schemes. There wasn't much creativity in terms of creating a sense of place around all these. It was just a big logging study,
Get your piece of the American dream.
Yeah, exactly. And they built, in this case, I think it was like 250 miles of, they cut 250 miles of roads in to get to some of these areas. So big chunks of this are already platted, but we started to break down the physical attributes of the land. You've got roadways there. You've got a series of wetlands that occur back in this area behind the beach zone. This is all pine flatwood forest, but there are all these roads cut in. It's quite amazing. And then a big area of wetlands up in here. And then there's some things, obviously, that have already been developed around in this zone over time. This is looking at where infrastructure exists and is available already, from full service water, sewer, power to bits and pieces. So this became part of our thought process about where you develop in the early phases or not, what's available. So this is part of just the strategic thinking and the analysis of this. This is all the area that was platted, literally. And then the amazing thing, I think it's the next slide here, yeah. This is land that was sold. Okay, so the light blue, you look at, it's just so crazy to me. All these little shotgun bits and pieces of land, little individual lots that were sold out in the middle of the woods. Probably to some person that was 3 sheets to the wind when they signed on the bottom line. But so you have this really bizarre pattern of land control, land ownership, and how do you deal with that? So we looked at that and said, okay, we created this diagram that said where are the areas of sold and unsold and what are the percentages, so that if you needed to start to think about swapping land with people that own these lots, if you can even find them in this day and age, to start to congregate land, mass together to do something meaningful. So this was just a diagram, started to understand how that land control breaks down. And then this was start to become a summary, and I'm again flushing through a lot of detail that went into the entire study, but this starts to become a summary of, there's North Shore wetlands in green, there's this whole platted area in sort of brown through the middle, and then the most unencumbered area of this 75,000 acres was all of that land really behind where the best beach is anyway, on the south shore there, in purple. So that started to just give everybody a basic understanding of where we really probably were going to focus any efforts in terms of long-term development plans. So this is just a simple diagram of that. 12,000 acres of wetland, 50,000 acres of platted and sold lands in the center, and then more so almost 14,000 acres of land on that south shore that was more so unencumbered. And so this started to become just a simple diagram or an approach to what you might do over time. And I won't read through this, but there were some things already happening out in this area. The College of the Bahamas had established a location here, so we started to think that there could be sort of an education hub there. They were talking about medical tourism. We thought it would make sense to start to bring some of that into play and start to link some of these things back down to the waterfront. And where the channel comes through is obviously there's real estate value that exists there that we felt could be taken advantage of in the near term. And then as you move down the coast, there's opportunity over a longer period of time, and we're talking about a 20, 30-year type vision for what things might happen. And so I think there was a phasing kind of diagram that I'll come to, but because of some of the sensitive wetlands that exist up in these areas, we were really prescribing some very low impact, low key kinds of development and picking particular spots where you might do something of more intensity. So then we really looked at the attributes of the place again, looking at the shore and the coastal condition. Unfortunately, a lot of the primary dune, which is the natural feature that helps protect the coast, keep it in place in storm events, protect the inland to a certain degree, was degraded because Australian pine trees have seeded themselves all the way along, so they have a big remediation plan they need to undertake. And that's happened in a lot of places in the Caribbean. Looking at the marine environment there and the asset that represents, and how do you do things that don't negatively impact that environment. They have these interesting geologic features called blue holes. So we certainly wanted to recognize those in place and be able to protect those as an asset. And then these are the wetlands in throughout that whole 14,000 acre zone that are really so important because these are the incubators of all the marine life that happens out in the coral reefs and so forth. And so while some people may think, well, they're just swamp, we need to fill them in and develop them. But if you really look at the economic value of those wetlands, and people understand this a lot more today than they ever did in the past, you understand why you have to protect those, because you start to wipe those out, you're wiping out much more of the ecosystem that relate to it. And then the understanding the upland conditions, some of the flora and fauna. And then this is very simple diagram, but an idea of how things might happen over time, moving down that coastline with the idea of something happening a little bit earlier near term here, and then eventually sort of moving eastward. Yes?
So are those the wetland areas, is that brackish or is it actually fresh?
It's probably in some cases a combination where there's water exchange between some of it coming through these blue holes. But yeah, it's fresh water from the inland side. Eventually it gets to the coast and starts to mix and exchange, and that's where a lot of that marine life is growing.
Where did you guys plan to source water for the development?
There's a huge freshwater lens, which is something I didn't put in this into this, but it sits over a good bit of this, which is another really interesting fact about what they did 40 years ago in planning all of this. They sort of ignored the fact that their whole freshwater supply for the island is right below all of that stuff. So one of the things we said is, if you can avoid doing anything out in that whole platted area, you probably should over time, because right below that is your freshwater source, and you don't want to compromise that. Yes?
So does this take into consideration also sea level change and climate change? Or do you design or hope to design the land to be able to handle that change? Or are you simply putting things further back in the case?
That's a great question, because it's something that we're dealing with now and we're going to need to deal with in a more serious way going forward. It's, in this case, there's a couple ways I'll answer that. One is this idea of being light on the land means respecting those wetlands, not pushing things right up and destroying that primary dune that exists and sort of rebuilding that, because that's part of the protection mechanism. So when you get down to some of the detailed recommendations about how you might develop some of these things over time, those details start to come into play. A lot of that then is also setting floor elevations of buildings so that you know, as sea levels rise, and storm events come in, you know, all those FEMA requirements that set floor elevations today are going to change because of sea level rise as well. So some of that you have to start to think, anticipate into the future what those impacts are going to be. And that's why, just not to digress on politics for a moment, but that's why it's so disappointing to me that our government leaders right now have decided to sort of back out of the Paris Accord and so forth, because it's so important to the future of everybody on the planet. You know, we can't ignore it. And I think it's something, it's obviously highly relevant in the real estate industry. So something we all need to work with and become educated about, because it's happening. It's a scientific fact. It's not conjecture. So, yes.
So again, I'm regionally not from here, so I'm not familiar with the Bahamas law system. Is it British common law for like your plats and the ownership of the real?
The Bahamas became an independent nation in the late 60s. So they have their own. It probably is based on British common law. Yes.
Yeah, that's what.
Yeah, you can see it. Yeah. You can see it in certain Caribbean islands, depending on who was there first from Europe.
Yeah.
You have certain influences, like Turks and Caicos have a highly networked environment with the UK.
Yeah.
I'm from Arkansas. We've used, you know, the British common law system, but if you go down to Louisiana, it's French.
Yeah.
So yeah, you got landowners that are kind of confused when we're trying to buy and sell between each other. Yeah.
So again, this is pretty simplistic, but it's trying to paint a picture of a 20 or 30-year horizon, what the opportunities are, what the assets are, and how you need to sort of think about dealing with those over time. Obviously, as things happen along that coast, and actually there's a big proposal for something to happen along that area now that we're going to be jumping into, but all that detail that we just talked about would then come into at a much finer level of grain detail. And this is that idea, simple sort of idea of phasing how things might go from west to east over time. And so then we took a look at what was this near-term opportunity, sort of guided by the client in this case, and it was the idea of creating what they wanted to call Barbary Town. Barbary was just a historic marker of some kind in that area around where they created the channel. And so they very much wanted us to think of this as combining this with the market research, an opportunity to create a smart city, smart village kind of development, meaning one that tries to incorporate all the latest technology and how you design and then manage and operate a real estate development and a city in place, and capturing information and using that wisely for efficiencies in energy use and in how people interact and how logistics work within the city. Yeah.
At that point, when you guys were engaged with this, had they already had like their major IT lines run across?
No, they weren't, those weren't to the island yet. Actually, that's a good question. I haven't found out the status of that. I know they've been putting a line underwater. It's trying to get to Nassau, I think, but something I need to look at. And so this is the mouth of the channel. If you zoom way in now, it starts here and goes all the way to the north. And that dashed line represents now more so about an 800 acre area, so still a pretty big piece of land to deal with. That crosshatch around the edges, again, is all that area that's already been planted. So, you know, from the land control aspect, we really couldn't touch that. And then we generated a development plan, a framework plan to come into this area and create you know, a coastal village, if you will, mixed-use village that includes resort, but includes even business opportunities, mixed-use opportunities, even primary home types of opportunities. And this is just the various layers of the elements of the community and the place that, when you add them all together, give you a land use plan, a framework plan. And so this meant, again, skipping through a lot of detail, but this meets a lot of the information put forth in the market research and marries that up to, you know, what you need to do in terms of transportation network, location of the various uses and how they relate to each other, and creating sort of a pattern and a structure to create a community. And in this case, the darker blue is the existing waterway, but we saw opportunities to expand on that and connect some pieces, get better flushing of for water quality, but also create more waterfront real estate. And then this is sort of an illustrative planned version of how that all might happen over time when it's built out. So you see, you know, sort of a village center based around a marina here, a protected marina. You see resort hotel opportunities. On the waterfront, you see upscale residential opportunities, waterfront residential opportunities, and then, you know, some places for, you know, commerce and business to happen within that as well. And then part of the effort to paint the vision is just to start to look at imagery, character of the place. And so around that marina basin, you know, what might the architectural style and the flavor of the site and landscape start to look and feel, picking up on something that would be Bahamian in feel and Caribbean in feel. And so this is a series of what we call image boards to help, again, start to paint the picture of what the place should feel and could be. Residential product, how the open space systems of that place could work and feel. And then we start to just model this a little bit very simply in three-dimensional modeling, so that a picture paints 1,000 words. You can show people plans. We find all the time, even with developers, they don't necessarily read plans that well. And so more three-dimensional views of things always help people understand a little bit easier what the thought process and recommendations. Okay, so that was the first case study. I don't know if we want to just take a break or have some conversation. Yeah.
The timing of all this, like that obviously took a lot of time. How much time did that take on certain projects?
That process that I just took you through happened over probably about 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was on Google Maps and satellite looking at the canal and everything else, the channel.
Yeah.
A lot of it it's pretty updated, but it looks like it's already been, you know.
So, and I say 6 months from the time
they approached you, or
that Ernst & Young completed their market study.
And what's the longest, I guess, project you've been a part of in years or?
Yeah, and John mentioned, I mean, in these, especially these large master plan projects, they build out over decades in some cases. And maybe Atlantis is a good example. In 1992, we started the work there, and we're still involved today. It's sort of ongoing. So we do the land planning, we do the landscape architecture, and in the best world for us, we're doing both of those. That the landscape architecture is a continuation of the master planning process, and it's the implementation design portion of it. In some cases, we just do the master planning. In other cases, we're just doing the landscape architecture. But again, ideally, we're able to see it through the board.
So then, would the Port Authority, in this case, the DevCo, is what it was, they would take these renderings and these plans and put that out as part of their RFP?
They haven't done that, but that would have been, they could solicit proposals from developers through an RFP process with all of this information as the sort of backdrop and vision. And that, you see that in most cases where there's a public agency soliciting private developers, is there's been a study typically done that sets a baseline for what they'd like to accomplish, and sometimes a framework that they want the developers to look at. So yeah, it's not how that was. They actually haven't done a whole lot with that information, to be quite honest with you, although they have a big player coming to the table now. But they've done it more, I think, through private channels than public solicitation.
I think we need a break. We need to stretch for a minute or two.
Okay. Yeah.
So it has been a long day, and we still have some fun to go. One or two folks are ready to fall nap. Let's do a 5-minute break. And I honestly tell you again, if you don't have to go to the bathroom, walk down the hallway twice, stretch your legs. Like everyone gets up.
Kyle? Oh, okay, yeah, good. Good, excellent. Let me give you a card. Oh, George. Oh, yeah, one of my buddies. George, great guy. Wait, you want my drawers?
Yeah.
In some of the terminology that we have discussed already this morning, so you will have but we will really enjoy this. Might be some scheduled, but you have to scroll down and sign the image view. So that's good. And then usually what I've done in the past is I download the copy and put that up as well. So a little bit of Hi.
Feel like you're chair of the
I just thought everybody was
semi-retired from ULI, although I suppose go to all the national meetings.
Right, everybody's sick.
Yeah. And we have a governance committee, so
I actually want to talk to you.
yeah. And it makes me fun.
They're all like,
Well, that's where,
I'm really interested in hearing.
it's a group that's formed virtually. It's really, we always do things
let's talk about.
So it's supposed to be on Tuesday, Tuesday, my brother's off.
Yeah, that's good. That's a great point.
We're the 26th.
Yeah, especially
Different players, but we all know it's
You wasted.
where I get my business, architects,
Save everyone time.
all kinds of different professionals. I would know how.
Production, instead of sitting in the tower and they all maybe they're gonna text while they're driving, you know, whatever. Yes. So, does this Google Meet have? Yes.
He's like, finance, I'm not recording.
I'm younger, right? My background.
In August, in Chicago. I'm ready to pull out a winter coat.
I did enjoy Chicago.
Yeah, I know, I remember back in Texas,
Never hire someone.
sometimes that's how I do.
one thing you touched on.
Rapidly.
We hire someone who's really smart, and we're trying to and all this stuff. They get and so
Plugged it in.
Honestly, that's the hardest.
Actually, the corners.
Because earlier, if I was to go and spend
Now that you mentioned it, I know it was contagious.
Good. I have, yeah, all electrical is done. I built a new bathroom.
I'm excited. I need to see the plans though, because I'm wondering, am I gonna critique it or am I gonna snap my fingers? Because I will tell you honestly, you messed up something.
Not really, because I was talking about it. I think it's not, it didn't seem, in my opinion, big enough, or big enough suite, that it would be functional for a team. But somebody could make it that way, but I don't want to classify it in that. It was originally a 3-bedroom, 1 bathroom, and now I have 3 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms. I think it's gonna look great. When you walk in, we have a giant walk in,
Oh man, final countdown. I'm just kidding. Yeah, JK. Snacking. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I'm getting.
Speaking of homemade meat sauce?
Not completely from scratch, but
What do you have going on for the rest of the weekend?
till 9 o'clock probably class-related work.
It's neutral and it's not a really.
I have a house class usually for 3 weeks.
Nice.
Stay in the background.
And doing work with the scuba diving team on Nova tomorrow morning.
I'll be here now too.
I'm doing the last 8 weeks and the next 8 weeks I'm having like three dive days.
Sweet.
That's it.
How deep do you take them?
Tomorrow it's longer than by the sea, which is 25 foot. Yeah, deep dive sometimes 200.
Oh wow.
Fun.
Oh, it's gotta be awesome. That'd be nice.
I know it can be too wild, and it can be too wild, but it's also a very small space. So if it's too wild, it's gonna end the whole thing. I didn't go to that.
All right, we're going to kick back in. But John and I were just having a chat about something I think we'll just jump into because, you know, I'm showing all these images of these projects in different places of the world, and obviously there's the physical outcome is fun to see and all that. But as John pointed out, you have failures along the way. And it's probably an important part of the process, your career process even, to have those failures. And it's sort of what you do with those failures going forward that sort of defines your success in the future.
I would think if you don't have a failure, you're not doing anything. And, you know, and it's what you do when you arrive at a failure and how you deal with it, how you overcome it is going to determine your success in the future. We talked about a couple of deals. One called Desiree was a rather large project in Malaysia, headquartered out of Singapore. And I got a call one day from Ed Stone, and he says, John, I got this guy in my office. I'd like you to come over and meet him. And it was a guy named Contractor, and they were going to do this project in Malaysia with 7 golf courses, and they're going to have a ski mountain under a big glass canopy, and have all kinds of things. It's huge. And they hired all of, Nicholas Palmer, all 7 noted architects to do that. Wembley, Allison Tamagu, who you mentioned out of Hawaii, Hillman out of England. It was a construction firm, and numerous other architects. Just a giant project, millions of dollars. And so they hired me to find the president of it. And I thought, boy, this is going to be fun. And so we found a president. He was hired, and he was started. And 6 weeks later, Tangaturai and his partner, was a Japanese firm, Kajima, sued each other. And the project stopped. Nothing happened. And then the project went dormant. And here were all these firms from EDSA to us to Hillman. I mean, mine was just a little tiny piece that they had left to pay, but we're talking millions of dollars in fees that hadn't been paid and weren't going to be paid. And we had to form we called it the Desiree Alumni Club. And so we all on a pari passu basis on some fees and hired a lawyer out of London to prosecute the government of Malaysia. And we ended up, at the end of the day, getting paid about 10 or 15 cents on the dollar. But we had to learn from that, and we talked about China. I've done some work in China. Chinese are infamous about having you do a lot of work for them and not really paying you. And they do that in Latin America too. I think genetically they're all linked. And they do that in the Arabian countries. It's, you know, it's really hard sometimes to collect, and you have to go through a couple of those things to learn that, you know, how are you going to deal with that environment? And those are painful things to do work and not get paid for it. And you guys have had to learn. You're getting very good at it.
Well, we like to think we are, but it's still probably one of our biggest business challenges is chasing down the growth.
Yeah.
And, you know, so to your point, and a lot of, it even happens in the U.S. It's not just,
oh, yeah.
It's not just in foreign countries where you get sort of deadbeat clients that decide they don't want to pay for the services you provided. But, you know, so we've tried to put mechanisms in place, safeguards, so to speak, that you don't get the work too far out ahead of the payments that are coming in. You have to have the discipline to hold the work sometimes if you haven't been paid, you know, previous invoices and so forth. And it's a discipline. It's a really tough discipline because we in the design world tend to fall in love with doing the work and generating these, you know, these really neat places and the drawings and the plans to do that. And, you know, we want to get that out in the hands of the client and have them be happy and so forth. So it's just always this push and pull. But the accounts receivable is a big part of our monthly focus on just making sure we're operating appropriately as a business.
Another one comes to mind, Nor Delta in Argentina. It's just north of Buenos Aires. It's about 35 kilometers north, because I know you guys did work on it. Arvida was brought in to be a developer of it. They blew out. So I brought Atlantic Golf in, and we had an LOI, we were going to be developers of that project. And Kim Woodbury, I don't know if you know, he used to do all their planning for Atlantic Golf. So he started doing all these drawings of what Nor Delta could be. It's 5,000 acres right on the river, what is it, the Plata. And anyhow, and they're beautiful designs, and they said, God, we love this stuff. Keep them coming. You know, we're going to work with you guys here. And in the meantime, we didn't have a definitive agreement, so he kept sending these plans and plans and plans, and finally, after a while, they said, you know, we got to have a contract, and the guy said, well, I got all these plans. What do I need you for? And if you take a look at the map today, that's what it looks like. Now, part of those plans they commingle those plans with what you guys did, Nor Delta, and so it was built just exactly that way. And I think it was a very successful project. So it's, and you can find some interesting things that, the other thing is most developers, especially in the recreation or the second home business, and they're just a little shy of one tiny little thing, and that's capital. And, you know, they get started, they own the land, they think, God, this is great, and you know, we'll hire EDSA, we'll do a market study, we know there's a thing there, but you know, we just don't have a lot of capital. And we run into that, I would say, a lot.
And you'll get paid when we get our funding secured.
Yeah, but it's right around the corner. They promised it to us. And a lot of times that thing doesn't happen. But in the meantime, you learn what the signs are. And you know, if you don't have those mistakes, if you don't have those things happen, when it happens, I always say, I did a study once for one of the largest developers in the world at the time, a company called Grupo Citur and Citec, out of Mexico. And they were developing on both coasts. And I had to go meet with they had 5,000 people, and I had to go meet with all their division presidents all over Mexico. And I asked them the one thing, what do you worry about the most? And they all said the same thing, the devaluation of the peso. And I said, well, plan for it. You know, Murphy's Law works in Mexico too. You know, St. Patrick's Day tomorrow, and Murphy's hard at work. If it can't go wrong, it will. So plan for it. And if it doesn't happen, nobody gets disappointed. But plan for it, because if you don't, and we had a big meeting in Carreras, and had all the division presidents, all the staff, they had 200 to 300 people. The plan was they were going to take it, they had hotels, they had a hotel management company, they had planners, they had architects, and they had developers. And we're going to spin everything out into its own entity. So the hotel ownership would be an entity, the hotel management company would have a contract, because all asset classes work differently. They don't all go down at the same time. You know, development, if they have a large planning firm internally, you know, we learned that in the United States. You know, if you run into a slowdown, you still have all those salaries to pay. And the same thing with architecture firms and construction firms they had internal. So spin them all out and hire them back, you know, for all the work that you're doing. And then if the peso's devalued, well, you can do an orderly transition and work your way out of it and get down to your core development company, which is 200 to 300 people. And all the division presidents that had asset-bearing, you know, that were operational, not service providers, they were all 100% in favor of it, but all the service providers didn't want to lose the mothership. You know, they liked working for their company. So at the end of the day, the president said, you know, we have a really good company, we're really successful. I hear what you're saying, but we're not going to do anything. And I don't know, 6 to 9 months later, the peso went from 3 to 1 to 9 to 1. So they're, or 7 to 1. So their borrowing in euro dollars went from $1 billion at the time to $2.5 billion overnight. I mean, in one day. So the company ended up firing all their secretaries. And they couldn't write a letter. I mean, it doesn't exist anymore because they didn't plan for it. And not saying that it would still be here, but it probably would have been had they planned for it. So there is no such thing as a thing that works exactly the way you think it will. You hope it will, and if it does, you won't be disappointed. But plan for what can go wrong along the way, because it will. And what are you going to do with it when it happens? And have a plan ready to do with it. And as you're progressing in your career, you'll have setbacks. You know, it happens. We all have setbacks. But we talked about ego. Ego, I learned early on that ego doesn't buy groceries. You can't trade your ego for anything, right? Trammell Crow, one of the largest employers, developers in the world at the time, he used to have a saying that Trammell himself said, never hire someone that other people don't want to help. And if you stop and think about it, you know, the person that is always kind to you, the person that will always give you a hand if you need it, when he needs some help, you're more than willing to do it. But the person that never has time for you, when he gets in trouble, guess what? And no one's around to help him out. And that's a painful lesson to learn. But so, you know, it's a business, as you talked about, of relationships. Those relationships you make in all the disciplines, they're going to come back to be very valuable to you. The person right now that's a lower level person inside of a company will sometimes be a very senior person inside of the company. You build those relationships early and build lots of them. And when somebody needs some help, get the time, give them the help. That'll come back. And don't worry about the payback. Some people will return the favor, others won't. It's no skin off your back if they don't return it. But the ones that do, you're very thankful for. So I think philosophically, as you go through your career, that's what you need to be thinking about.
What comes to mind, and I always go back to Ed Stone on a lot of things, is he always taught, and this is the culture again aspect of business and companies, is simple, golden rule. Treat others as you wish to be treated yourself, and it extends, you know, into the business world for sure. And I think this point about we all have made mistakes in our professional lives and probably in our personal lives, you know, you realize it's those mistakes that teach you the most along the way and inform you, you know, how you go forward. So, you know, they're tough to take sometimes, but embrace it and learn from it, and then move on. You're going to be better for it. And I think it's also this idea of putting a team of experts together. None of us know it all, right? And so that team, that diagram, is so important to this development process, because everybody brings something to the table that's important to the successful outcome. So while we're going to make mistakes, you can also, to a certain degree, try to avoid mistakes by just getting the right players to the table. You know, and so that's an important, I think, aspect of this as well. I don't know, any thoughts or questions about any of that?
Yeah, what are the things that are important to you guys that we can add to?
I would like to hear the story about your office development, office building in downtown. Because it has been a theme since I met you the first time, and you seem pretty happy that you actually have it, you're done with it now. So,
not quite. I'm done with the sale of it. So, there was one, when I moved into Fort Lauderdale, there was one office building downtown, the Landmark Bank building. It was a high-rise. And after a while, I hated, going in the parking, going on this circular path to get up. You could never remember what floor you left your car on. And, it was 20 minutes in and 20 minutes out. And I had a house in Rio Vista, which was right around the corner from downtown. And I thought, God, wouldn't it be nice to lease a place on the water where you could take a boat to? So I went to find a place that I could lease, and I came to find out there wasn't any office buildings on the water. There was none. There was one building. It had on the first floor, it was the Grapevine Pub. It was a restaurant. And on the second floor was doctor's offices. And that was the only building on the river in downtown. And so I went to the doctor who owned it, and I made him an offer on the building, all cash, no contingencies. And I was a rookie. I'd done one building, I did another building downtown, historical rehab. And he took the offer and shopped it around and got some other offers, probably higher than mine, but they all had contingencies. They all want to take 6 months to study it, and we'll figure out what they could do with it, and so forth and so on. And so he said, look, if I'm going to do this, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to do it. So he accepted my offer. There was one just tiny little problem with it, is I didn't have the money to pay for it. So, but not knowing any better, I figured I'll find it. And so I had brought in the executive director of the Council of 100 at the time. It's now, I think, the Broward Workshop or something. And they were the issuer of industrial revenue bonds. And so I talked to the guy, the executive director, and I said, would my office building fit? He said, well, it needs to be international headquarters, and it needs to have this and that and whatnot. And I said, could you send me a couple of your deals that you passed? And he did. So I pasted and copied and sent it in, and sure enough, they accepted it. So I got a acquisition and construction loan on it. And then I went and got an architect and a builder that would just finish another high-rise building, and got them to do a design build. And this is where the learning curve comes in. So, so I had all the money. I'd raised it through the industrial revenue bonds. And at the time, everybody wanted the bonds. They're tax-free to the banks, and the banks were fighting to get it. And the bank that I took it with, I think it was NCNB, I was 10 days away from closing, and they came to me and said, I said, I don't have my firm commitment letter. And he said, yeah, I know. And I said, so when can I expect it? And he said, well, we're not going to give it to you. Because all of a sudden the bonds, they took a dip. The Reagan Tax Act kind of took the zing out of those bonds, so they were no longer, very marketable. So I said, well, you made a commitment. He said, yeah, but it isn't in writing. And so it just so happened a friend of mine, a boat partner who was the former president of Arvida, was on the national board of the bank. So I called him up and I said, you know, and I told him the story. He said, well, that doesn't sound good. So he calls the overall president of the state of Florida and he says, that's not the way we do business. So he calls the local guy and the local guy says, yeah, don't worry about it. I made him a commitment, sure, but we don't have to honor it because it wasn't in writing. Well, they did honor it because he told them that's not the way we do business. I mean, I got a commitment letter that was like that big with all kinds of onerous conditions, but I figured once I have the money, screw it, and I'm not going to worry about what's inside of it. So we went on to do it, and I said the second thing that I did, we did it with industrial revenue bonds, not a bank loan. So we went and built the building. About 3/4 of the way through the building, I noticed that things had started to slow down and things just weren't working the way they should. And I come to find out our contractor had some financial problems. He'd been taking draws okay, but that money was going out to the other contractors. And the way I knew that, I started getting things called equity liens. I wasn't quite sure what an equity lien was. So I went to a law firm that specializes in construction loans, and he says, don't worry about it. You got a contract? He said, I'll get your notice of commencement, and we're fine. And I said, what's a notice of commencement? And he said, oh, don't worry about it. He said, banks always do this to support their construction loan. I said, well, I had bonds. And he said, industrial revenue bonds are part of the bank. He said, he said, well, let me go find out. And sure enough, no notice of commencement had ever been filed, which meant that all the subcontractors could come directly through to me personally. And I didn't have the money to pay them all. So we had to, at that point, where you make mistakes, we had to figure out which liens were perfected and which weren't. We had to go about fixing it and getting the building built. And then I went and made sure I had all building full, major building full in terms of spaces by giving equity leases to a couple of different firms. And I went to the bank and I said, I can pay for a second mortgage to finish this building up. And will you give me a second mortgage? And he said, well, we want to think about it. And so at the end of the day, it took about 3 or 4 months, but the bank got back to me and said, can you come over here for a meeting? So I walked over to the bank, downtown Fort Lauderdale, nothing's too far away. And I went up to their conference room. There were about 15 people around the conference table, and a great big guy in the back. And I thought to myself, this can't be good. And the guy got up and introduced himself as a special asset manager and said, we're not going to give you the money, so what are you going to do? And I said, we have all my credit tied up, so I can't go out and get another mortgage. And he said, yeah. And I said, I didn't quite know what to do. So I said, well, let's play a game. And he said, well, I'll play along. And I said, you got 3 windows, the old game shows, and you had 3 curtains. I said, behind the first curtain, you're going to give me all the money I want. And they said, well, we're not. I said, well, the second curtain, you're going to release all my credit so I can go out and find another loan. Well, we don't want to do that either. And he said, what's the third one? I'm going to sue you. And I might have used some expletives. And I got up, walked out, and by the time I was back in my office, they had been on hold for about 5 minutes. And they said, okay, your credit's released. Had I sued them, I would have probably owned the bank. But anyway, so I ended up getting a mortgage on my house and ended up finishing the building, and I did it so I could take a boat to work. That's simply the reason I had it. But I also thought, here's an asset that will hold the land. In the meantime, all of, it's Riverwalk. The first part of Riverwalk, I happened to be on the oversight board, was built, strangely enough, right in front of my building. I thought that was very nice. And, but I thought somewhere they were gonna discover the water. This is beautiful, you know, the new river, and they did. And so on either side of me are 30 and 40-story buildings all the way up and down the river with only one development site left, that being my little 4-story office building. And now I had numerous offers along the way. One that I almost took from Wayne Huizinga, where they're going to build the Panther Stadium, and it fell through. But it's another apartment building, another condominium building. The site, it's a small site. It's about 36,000 square feet, and it wouldn't have worked. It would have been a Me Too product with everything else there, and you know we'll overbuild downtown. And so those offers, you know, I'll just wait till the next cycle. But the one thing that I knew would work, and was a senior living facility that didn't exist. And somebody came along with that idea and said, what will you take? And so I gave him a number, and he said, will you take less? And I said, no. And he said, okay. And then we closed on that. It took 3 years of entitlements, going through the DRC and the P&Z and all that stuff. And they're now going to put a 501,000 square foot senior living facility on the site. 42 stories with a restaurant on the 42nd floor. I'm going to stay in as a piece because it's a wonderful product, and it's one that's timely. And I had probably 4 developers afterwards come with exactly the same idea and asked if they could do backup contracts. So, you know, I know it probably works because they all thought it worked, and so that's the story. So it ended up being the highest price per square foot of land ever sold in Fort Lauderdale in its history. So from the place to take a boat to work to you know the final end of it, it worked out pretty well. But more importantly, again, even if I got the same price, I wouldn't have sold it for a condo or an apartment building. So it wouldn't have worked. It wouldn't have been right for the site. Senior living facility will, because you got Los Olas on one side, you got Center of the Performing Arts, you got all that infrastructure, you know, all the restaurants, everything there. And people like to retire where they live. You know, that's where all their friends are. Or if their family works downtown and they want their parents to be in a place, they want to be a place close by where they can go visit. There isn't anything. The only thing there was at the time is George Knox Village out by I-95, which is, you know, was built 40 years ago. And now there's a couple more that are being built, one on the Intercoastal and by Galleria and one off of Commercial, but none in the same space that this one is. So that's why I stayed in it for a small piece of it. So it's a pretty cool project.
So let me add a question to that. My mentor, he actually came 2 years ago here actually for a guest lecture. Very successful city manager back in the days, and then he said, okay, whatever the decisions you make, particularly in the planning world, you have to make sure that you're able to sleep at night. Listening to your story about here the credit is lost, here the funding is missing, and all that. The question to all 3 of you guest speakers is, what do you do for your stress? Because we are listening to all the successful stories, and here and there the stressful situations. How do you deal with your stress? And I know in grad school you have stress moments too. What's your experience in the past? You mentioned there are certain things about your job that you didn't envision at all. How do you deal with this? How do you shut the engine down if you can shut it down for that one moment in the evening or the weekend? And I know this is a very brutal question because I stole you away from families and friends.
Well, it's learned behavior. I mean, Doug, you probably have your way of doing it.
I'm sure it's different for everybody. But I think, just for me personally, physical exercise is a strong release for that. In fact, I just went out for a run this morning, and you know, before I left, I was thinking about the million things that I've got to accomplish in the next week, and you know, sort of feeling a little overwhelmed by some of that. But I think physical exercise for me personally is just a good way to do that. And obviously, as part of a healthy lifestyle. We have a crisis in the country, not to go off on a tangent, just health, healthy lifestyle.